Dream of Dragons, The Gathering Storm, written and narrated by Harley and Vanessa Hunt. Prologue, Beginnings. Pressing the cold edges of his thumb to his cheek, Therin felt his skin recoil from the sudden chill upon the air. Muscles ablaze, he struggled as he held the bow's taut string, which was quickly straining his still-developing form. Yet he redoubled his efforts and focused ever defiant to impress himself upon his father. Rapidly he looked on through the thicket of trees and snow at the frozen silhouette of a deer, ever searching for the coming threat. Counting his breaths as he was always taught, Therin carefully timed the release of his bow just as he had done 1,000 times before, but unlike those many preceding attempts, the snow now began to fall about him in a seemingly strange manner. Breath settling to its last count, Therin began to fight the indecision suddenly running havoc within himself. The fear of missing, fear of taking a life, and definitely scariest of all, the fear of disappointing his father held him at bay, until in that frightful moment a branch snapped from past his peripheral. Startled, the string he had been holding so tightly suddenly slipped through his fingers with naught but a wisp, and the arrow loosed. It flew hard but skewed, piercing the deer's upper back leg, sending it into a frantic run-off into the brush. Turning with fear to face his father, Therin felt sure that he was going to get a lecture, but to his surprise his father just looked on towards the direction of the fleeing deer. A long and enduring moment held sway upon the air, and Therin grew more nervous with every passing second. Where was the coming lecture? Strangely, his father hadn't even seemed displeased. If anything, he looked content, maybe even happy.
"Come, my boy. We shouldn't let it get too far. If we linger any longer, it may become too difficult to find its tracks in this snow."
Agenor spoke calmly as he turned gathering the clustered bags, tossing the smaller of the two to his son. Leaning his small bow on a tree, Therin hastily pulled the bag over his back before quickly reaching for the resting weapon. Heart pounding about his chest, Therin eagerly set off after his father, his bow swinging by his side. Methodically walking through the snow, Therin thought it best to remain quiet, as he wished not to poke the self-imposed effigy of a slumbering bear he had so erroneously drawn atop his father's apparent happy demeanour. Time passed and slowly his worries slipped from his mind as the sheer beauty of the Amberwoods overwhelmed him. Sure, he had plenty of fun in the snow back home, but this was the first time his father had allowed him to accompany him so far from home. Sure, he had ventured near its edge, but never did he dare go so far as to lose sight of the farmstead. He could never have imagined how spectacular it would look and feel up close, embalmed in its thick covering of snow. From time to time, a pocket of snow would fall from the trees, and soon the sound of running water began to be heard over the whistling wind. The trees began swaying rhythmically, taking on an otherworldly quality. The air convulsed and darted about, swirling around the trees in all but random directions, and soon so did he begin swaying to the rhythm of the shifting forest as if possessed by its spirit. Feeling maligned to the motions of his physical body, Therin frantically attempted to wrestle back control but quickly learned that the harder he pushed, the more the world seemed to push back. Therin quickly realized this and feared he would soon be overpowered by panic, yet in that moment he decided instead he would use all that he had left to dictate his next act. With great exertion, he tried to force a cry from his mouth, but the very air left it fleeting upon his tongue. At a complete loss, Therin could do little but consider what could be happening to him. Might he have fallen unconscious by some unknown means, and was he now dreaming, or rather more truthfully having a nightmare? Yet as soon as the thought passed through his mind, he quickly considered whether it mattered, for the wind still howled about, and he was still unable to move his body to action. As if knowing he was at the edge of his limits, a sudden and frightful sound of water washed over his ears with a great crash. Its mighty waves seemed to thrash about as if embroiled in a mighty battle of the ages. Faltering upon his feet, Therin's vision began to spin moments before his legs, suddenly buckled beneath the weight of all the sounds without, and all feelings within fighting for preeminence. Suddenly it all stopped, freezing as if the world had come to a standstill. Hoping the world had returned to its normal state, Therin looked up, seeing only the snow-covered canopy of swaying oaks and a deep, rich field of clouds staring back at him. Catching the rare ray of sunlight slicing through, Therin watched, unable to summon the strength to pull himself up. Slowly his father came into his peripheral, a slight smile betraying his near-constant expression. Kneeling down, Agenor placed a hand on his shoulder and sat him up.
"Calm your heart, my boy. It's the forest. The same thing happened to me when my father brought me here for the first time, albeit a little less dramatically."
He finished with a little chuckle, pulling Therin to his feet again.
"My father laughed for days when I missed my first deer."
Agenor continued as Therin brushed away the snow.
"There is something different to these woods, though I'm not sure of it myself, and no one has been able to explain it to me sufficiently either. Most don't even feel it, but those of us who do all agree it's intoxicating."
Agenor paused for a moment thinking.
I don't know. Any description would be pointless unless you have felt it yourself. In time you will understand.
Agenor pondered further, looking deeper into the forest.
Come, we shouldn't fall too far behind. The deer could collapse at any time.
With a lingering hand, Agenor brushed the last of the snow from his son's shoulder, and they were off. Therin took in all that he could as they stumbled through the forest, mind racing. What was it his father was trying to say? What did he mean it was the forest? It made no sense. Was he talking about magic? He had only ever read about those strange mystic arts in a few of the books his father had hidden away above the rafters at home. Again the wind howled, and the nearby half-frozen stream began to thaw. The finer detail in the trees began to highlight, becoming clear and vivid. The air wasn't just howling, it was dancing, and Therin could now see the motion clearly, and he quickly fell in step with the world moving around him. Strange floating particles began to pop in and out of the air, swaying and bulging until suddenly he and his father felt wholly separated from the wind and snow of the world. Perhaps, Therin wondered, might this be what father might have meant? He could still affect the world by the means of a simple interaction like the sway of a hand, but something more was seemingly happening before his eyes. It almost felt as though he could move the air by will alone, and as if bidden to do so by the forming thought, the wind instantly obeyed his wish, parting the falling snow like a curtain. Soon the trees began to whisper, quietly at first, but before long they were billowing and wailing in an odd, cumbersome speech that filled the space in its entirety, effectively denying all other sounds from being heard. Fearful of the voices in the deep and worried something was feeling very wrong, Therin shuffled towards his father, who was himself staring towards the north, seemingly looking at some place past the thick row of trees. Waiting for a short time, the voices began to fade away, leaving only an eerie silence where once the cumbersome speech filled the air. Alarmed, Therin turned from his father and looked to the north, watching for the slightest change in the distance. Even the smallest objects soon glistened with detail, ostensibly captured by his apparent enhanced senses. Moments passed that seemed an eternity when suddenly a large spear of ice burst through the forested cover and embedded itself into a tree only a fraction of a meter from his father. The tree wailed as the spear suddenly cracked apart and shattered as it fell to the ground. Once again the forest burst into a shouting match. Grasping at his ears, Therin did all he could to filter through the noise as his eyes darted back to his father. In the echo of the spear's passing, Agenor had already leapt into action, firing his powerful bow mid-stride. In the distance, a shattered screech yelled out, but instantly another great spear leaped from the forested cover. This time it grazed Agenor's left arm, shearing his bow in two. Instantly letting it drop, Agenor pulled his axe from his side with his right hand and grabbed Therin with his left. Bursting into a frighteningly fast sprint, Agenor ran as fast as he could, hurling southward through the deep snow-covered foliage. Agenor knew he would have to choose his moment with great care and precision, for whatever pursued them had thrown that spear with impossible strength, yet retained such accuracy that all but the most prestigious archers would be proud. Therin soon noticed that Agenor was slowing, so he looked over his shoulder to figure out why, yet he found no answer from his eyes. "Father, what's wrong? We have to get back to Mother." Coming to a rough stop, Agenor spun back, refusing to look away from the way they had come, for he feared it was too dangerous. Still poised for action, he breathed laboriously to quickly catch his breath. Yet he knew time was no ally in the current circumstances, and even his well-trained sense and fighting ability were insufficient while protecting the most precious of lives from such a foe of unknown number. "Therin," he said, gasping for air. "Son, I need you to run as fast as you can home. Tell your mother I love her, but you must all flee to Roland's Gap immediately." Agenor paused a moment to catch another fleeting breath before continuing. "I will meet you there later." "But father, I can't just leave you here," Therin cried. "I don't know the way." Agenor dropped his axe in a ring on his right side and knelt. Pulling the heavy pack from his shoulder, he retrieved a strip of cloth from a lesser pocket. Unfurling the makeshift bandage, he wrapped it around the wound on his bicep. All the while, his eyes remained ever fixed to the north. "Therin, you have to go. You can do this. It's just as I taught you. Use the shadows cast from the trees and head directly south." Tears freezing to his face, Therin looked at his father, pleading. "Please, father, I don't want to go." "Therin, your mother needs you. Now go." Agenor spoke strongly, pulling the axe free from its ring. A lone figure stepped out from behind the forest's cover, holding a spear of ice pointed forth. Seizing the moment, Agenor lunged forward, throwing his axe with such force that he had clearly caught it by surprise as the axe's head plunged deep into its chest. The strange creature froze as a clear expression of horror writhed across its face, but no longer than a second later its entire form began to shatter into 1,000 pieces as it fell to the snow. Therin too stood paralysed in disbelief at what his eyes had witnessed, but suddenly his father grabbed him by the collar in an effort to force him to action. "Therin, I love you before all else, my boy,
but by the light, go."
The very tears falling from his sentiment soon froze to his face as Therin looked into his father's eyes, but for what he saw in the depths of his father's soul behind his clear love for his family spoke only of fear. A deep abyssal fear, but of what he could only guess. At a loss for what he should do, Therin did the only thing left to him, so turned and ran as fast as his little legs could carry him. Watching only until his son reached the edge of his sight, Agenor turned to collect his axe still plunged deep into a large chunk of ice, now no different from any of the others strewn about the snow. Hand clenched around the handle, he took a deep breath, readying himself for what must come next. In a flash of lightning, Therin burst from the Amberwoods just as the heavens began to open. Adrift in the loss and longing to be at his father's side, he turned back, in a vain belief that maybe his father would walk out of that forest and they could finally go home. But deep down he knew there was little more than a cruel hope, and as his heart felt as though it could handle no more, out stepped 9 statues formed of ice. Standing higher than all the others, the centermost figure stirred forward as he raised his arm in a motion to beckon Therin back to the cold embrace of the forest. Daring not move, he stood firm, feeling the full force of the severe cold as his clothes froze to his skin, but to his astonishment the lead figure did not make any further signs he intended to follow. Instead, he made a simple yet alien gesture before shrinking, as if cloaked by darkness, back into the forest, swiftly flanked by his 8 companions. Feeling an incomprehensible wave of guilt, fear, and extreme fatigue, Therin leaned his head back. Above him the sky had turned angry, clouds billowed and riled. A spectacular show of lightning stretched across the horizon, just as a veil of rain suddenly washed the land in a thick blanket of water and hail. The so-called kings of the north, the great mountain ranges that had ever stood vigil over the Amberwoods and all the lands of the north, had begun to stir and shift. Though slight at first but ever increasing, they lost their crowns of white. Great swaths of the sky began to rip open, breaking the very fabric of the world. For hours he stood unable to turn from the sight as the tears spread far and wide, reaching southward towards the slopes of the tallest of the kings, the mighty dragon's fang. With only a shimmer as warning, the long rips in the sky flickered before dissolving into a beautiful hail of light, slowly fading until there was no evidence that anything had ever happened here. Moments later the thunder and lightning faded, yet not with a bang, but rather a whimper, until only a light rainfall remained to mark the fact that something had happened here. Regaining himself, Therin turned and ran with all he had left, hoping time would see him to his father's side once again. Excerpt prophecy from The Book of First Light. In times of wonder and times of change, where in the lands of the north, which known for its stability will the earth suddenly shake, the gentle air will quicken and calm oceans will roar, the great king of mountains will rage and shake from our world into the next. Beckoned upon the frozen air will a great tear form pathways to land long forgotten, and mighty rains will fall, blanketing the land in a dire deluge. For endless days the storm will billow and rage, lightning cracking and thunder booming. The tempest will spread far and wide, sounding a grand orchestra for his coming, for amongst men will the Tal'dorin walk. The first bell will sound the beginning upon the fallen crown of the dragon's fang, but only an arrow's flight will prove it right. An unlikely kindness will save a life, and courage will quench it tight, yet only in the blood of the first will the pact be bound. The endless march on the realms of man will break the talon, and the gap will fall, yet given pause will the ice sea be, for upon the walls of old will they be received in thy blazing light. The second bell will ring to howls of wolves, for in the full moon will the creatures of the night hound their flight. Bound by boards and blades will he find each new sight fortified towards the night, yet to his strength would many flee to join his flight, if only to live past the next night. Darker the day must grow, and bloody will his fangs yet seethe, but onwards he must march, and to the next he must proceed, for in the furnace of his plight might the tale of the dragon's lost night be proved in the receding of the twilight. Thrice will the bells sound their coming. To the fall of the dragon will these birds sing their symphony. But little do they know of this Tal'dorin, for the dragon prophesied this proves him to be. Gleefully boasting in triumph will they flee, blood-stained blade left by thy side. But to the ones left behind flows a time of pity and pain, for when the Tal'dorin bleeds, so must we all, for due is the price that must be paid. So wherever thee travels, so will tragedy ever creep, for the world, and here inexplicably linked. Yet to the watcher a question remains. How could one so high as he be laid so low by betrayal's deed? But few who still walk this realm know of the songs of old, where in their lyrics lies the fate of it all. For in betrayal and death will he finally known that in his reflection lies the first lord, long forgotten to an eternal slumber. But as the first he is not so easily bound even for the likes of death. So when he returns from that far-off place, can he be none other than the Ancient One, the Dragon of Time. Chapter 1. The Euphoria of Power. Diminishing to the near window, the man leaned as he looked out its slightly open pane upon the vista of a land long twisted and broken. You ask me where this all began, yet by your manner it seems my answer has fallen upon unsatisfied ears. Taking a slight pause, he drew his gaze from the base of the once great tower cast asunder from some unknown catastrophe, and again faced the old scribe. Please take no offence, for I mean only to be direct, and intend to infer that my years before the calamity in the Amberwoods have grown rather vague. Leaning forward a little, the scribe inquired further. I take no discourtesy nor offence, my lord, but I would still like to hear all that you may remember. Fair enough, though I cannot promise it will be as exhilarating as those tales others have told of me. Please, I'm sure you're only being modest, and let me state that you are much unlike the brute told of in those tales. Letting a slight smile across his face from the flattery in his words, the well-dressed man thought on his past, and soon gave it a voice. Well, as you can imagine, I was forced to grow up quickly. So after my family and I reached Roland's Gap, I quickly apprenticed as a blacksmith, all in an effort to contribute to a community I was never born to. Years passed and I had become quite proficient. I was no master, yet I could hammer out a decent blade. Trailing off in thought, he added, now that I look back, I would say those were probably the most peaceful years of my life. Really? I didn't know what I was expecting, but I figured your early years would have been filled with adventures and soldierly endeavours. My life back then was much simpler, though I had my share of troubles like most young men, most notably a young woman I fear to call a lady. Frida, heir apparent to the Duchy of Corbain, a particularly despicable individual who caused me great frustration at the time. Actually, an old man once told me of a similar experience regarding the Corbains. I'm guessing it's safe to say you share the same sentiment. Indeed it is, and I would bet many would, but returning to young Frida, she came to me wanting to commission a gift, a gesture if you will, for her father. I sketched just as she described, but once done, she suddenly changed her mind, if only at a whim. Leaving in a hurry, she dropped what I thought to be by accident. A golden wolf-head medallion the size of a sword's pommel. I tried returning it, but by the time I picked it up, she was already outside, nowhere to be seen. Seeing no other course of action, I placed the medallion in a lockbox with a note, putting in words all I have already spoken. Truth be told, I dreaded her return, and I was right to, seeing as she did so at the heel of her father accusing me of stealing. Yet I will not have this tale mired by shadows and darkness, but rather how light must respond to it, and the rest, as they say, is history. Therin, you're a good lad. I'd wager you would have become the best blacksmith that's ever stepped foot in this forge, but I can't have these rumours hanging about. It could ruin me, by the light I have a family to feed. Therin carefully studied Sven's words, finding he now regretted his own, for he felt a profound understanding for the unstable ground Sven now found himself upon. Silence falling over the conversation, Therin feared he knew what was coming. I'm going to have to let you go, Therin. Please don't think I say this easily, and don't think the promises I made to your father were done lightly. It was a promise I made long ago, but I can't have my business go down the sinker because of it. I understand, Sven. The Baron has made his will known, and that is as good as law around here. I will not have your family suffer because of all this. We all have to do what we have to do. Therin stood from his seat, pulling himself straight, and moved for the door. With his hand on the handle, he turned back. I just realised that Frida's name is shortened from Frieden. It's sort of ironic, because Frieden literally means peace. Letting out an audible sigh, Therin turned back to the door, cursing under his breath. More like a pretentious witch, if you ask me. I won't disagree with you there, lad, Sven replied with dismay, as Therin slipped through the door, disappearing into the night. Completely absent, Therin walked the dark streets, feeling a profound loneliness that he could hardly hope to unravel. All the while, the question of whether he would ever belong haunted his every step. Only the water-soaked prints in the damp earth proved his passing, yet with every pace taken, the chaotic flicker of torchlight washed over him, like a cleansing fire searing away the metaphoric demons in the dark. Yet from this darkness, a distant echo of conversation perked his attention. Though soft at first, the sound resonated down the street like a beacon drawing Therin closer. Looking up, he noticed the distinct glow of candles flickering through a window, and a sign with "The Dancing Dragon" written boldly above the door. A smile grew steadily. Here he thought was a place worthy to drown his sorrows and anger. A decision hardly his own. Therin reached for the door, but a familiar sound pulled him back, with a clear reminder that fate was as always a cruel mistress. Before him strolled the embodiment of all his troubles. The same woman from earlier now laughed and joked bombastically as she made her way south accompanied by two others, to what Therin assumed would be her father's villa. Therin exasperated. Must feel gratifying to ruin someone's life, he added quietly, figuring she must be all too pleased with herself. As they passed, Therin tried to recall if he had ever been acquainted with any of her companions, yet their identities eluded him. Suddenly and without warning, a stray thought streaked across his mind, causing a burst of laughter to escape his control. The thought that she could actually have any friends tickled him more than he realized. Surprised, Frida turned inquisitively, looking to where she had heard the outburst. A sinister expression growing the moment she noticed the man standing by the tavern. Consciously bracing himself, Therin watched as she marched over to him, with little more than pure, unbridled intent radiating about her. Only stopping once she had moved close enough to be uncomfortable. With a crick of her neck and the puffing of her chest, she looked up at him.
We must stop meeting like this.
Frida mocked, her grin ever patronizing, as her sinister smile scarcely masked the not-so-subtle sneers upon her breath.
What was your name again? Sorry, wait. I don't care.
Frida said, turning to her friends laughing, eyes instantly judging their uncharacteristic silence.
Apparently yesterday wasn't enough for him. Just look. Here he is looking for more, and in public no less. Brave yet stupid.
Frida snarked in an awkward attempt to mock him, but to her frustration the others remained quiet, clearly uncomfortable. Murmuring amongst themselves, the young women hoped Frida would stop, fearing she had already taken it too far. Weathering the onslaught, Therin stood firm, looking through Frida's killer gaze. The more she spoke, the more he realized this was all a petty little show for her friends. You know, I finally get it. You're just a little girl playing at being an adult. I mean, just look at you. You're not even talking to me. Therin stopped motioning towards Frida's companions. This is all just a sad little play for the benefit of your friends. But damn be those who get in your way. Am I right? Therin exasperated. As he was about to turn, a final realization came over him. This whole medallion thing was a con, wasn't it? But what I don't understand is why. You're the Baron's daughter, you could have almost anything you seek, yet for some reason it's not enough. So what does that make you? Just another insufferable witch. Confronted by his words and candor, Frida stepped back, shocked.
What did you just say to me, commoner? Little girl am I. You really are stupid, aren't you, boy? Your parents sure didn't teach you that it's a bad idea to speak back to those above your station. Oh, wait a second. That's right. Your father left you when you were still a boy. I guess that explains a lot.
Frida paused only long enough to gauge his reaction.
See, you're not the only one with teeth, Therin, but unlike me, you're just another dog.
Therin was about to rebut, but Frida immediately cut him off.
Now, be careful, Therin. You do not want to say something you will regret.
The only thing I regret, Frida, is knowing you. Therin answered defiantly, but unsure how far he should go. Yet the moment he saw the anger screeching across her face, he could hardly contain himself. You don't even realize that you're a parasite feeding off of a world falsely believing that it's your birthright. You have plenty of people willing to do your bidding, but how much of that is loyalty, and how much of it is because you have a golden leash wrapped around their necks? Frida's anger grew palpable, and her teeth began to grind. Gasping, the pair of girls began to gossip, wondering what could possibly happen next. Already committed, Therin figured his hole had already been dug, so thought he might as well continue. How about you prove me wrong? Go to your father, confess, and deal with the repercussions. For it is then, and only then, that you can look me in the eye and tell me you're not the person I believe you to be. Noticing Frida lost for words, Therin continued. See, you can't do it. You're nothing more than a coward. Whack! Therin felt a stinging sensation burning across his cheek. Instinctively, he pulled his hand up, placing it softly over the reddening skin, blaming the pain. Frida stormed off, but turning back with a threat.
My father will hear of this.
Focusing her attention on the ever-growing crowd forming around them, she bared them a warning.
And to all those who bear witness, the House of Corbeil never forgets a slight. So I would advise you all to choose your words, and more importantly, futures wisely.
Therin turned to see Sven's son Riker standing in the doorway. I'm thinking you may have gone a little too far, Therin. I fear a reckoning will be coming your way for that. Therin laughed nervously, trying to stifle his emotions. Yeah, I know. It has been a long day, and somehow that woman knows just how to push my buttons. First, she gets me fired, and then she bails me up to gloat. Taking a moment, he turned back to Frida, who was storming up the road. Yeah, that was definitely a mistake. Riker placed a hand on Therin's shoulder, pulling him into the tavern. Come, let's have a drink. It's the least I could do. Allowing himself one night, Therin complied, feeling he needed nothing more. Cheers to that. Taking a seat at the only vacant table, Riker motioned for the barmaid to attend before turning back to Therin. I am sorry about my father. I tried to get him to let you stay, but he would not have a bar of it. Feeling the true sting of his actions, Therin slumped down into the chair across from Riker. It's fine, though I can't say that it didn't hurt, but I will live with whatever comes. Besides, I'm thinking it would be best if I laid low for a while, let all this blow over. Startled by a sudden thump, Therin looked up to a tall, beautiful barmaid, placing a pair of tankards down on the table with a smile beaming across her face.
That was one glorious show you put on out there, Therin, and by goodness did she have it coming, but promise me you will try to keep yourself out of trouble.
Therin could only smile as he nodded, pulling a silver coin from his pocket. Still smiling, the bar lady refused.
Please, the drinks are on the house. That show alone was worth at least a few drinks.
Thank you, Gwen. I'll do my best. Pulling the tankard to his lips, Therin began to drink, fully intent on enjoying the night, in spite of the evening.
Chapter 2. The Lady of the Phoenix. Illarna rode hard with her arm raised aloft, in a futile attempt to shield herself from the sun's golden rays. The silver in her eyes shone radiantly in the harsh light of a star reaching its zenith, its brilliance setting alight the crimson of her hair, as it flourished to the motion of the horse galloping beneath. Her porcelain skin gleamed as a sudden yet soft gust of wind danced across her forearms, caressing the fine hair along her skin, sending a surprisingly pleasant sensation down her arms. A dire summons by her father, the High Lord of the Kingdom of Valentia, Illarna Valenkor, ever present in the back of her mind. Apparently there were some pressing matters that needed to be dealt with, though with such blatant disregard for protocol, she could not help but be curious. There had been a number of signs these past 9 years, and everything was lining up just like they had in the legends foretold, yet she couldn't bring herself to believe it. The legend itself had been drilled into her head damn near every day since she could remember, yet somehow she always figured it was just a story. The fact that it was called The Return of the Tal'dorin did not help the situation, but recent events couldn't be ignored. In the past year alone, there had been 7 storms that lasted exactly 9 hours each. Stranger still, between each storm was a period of 27 days of completely perfect weather. Not a very odd occurrence for the Golden Groves of Valentor, but the pattern had been found everywhere. For some reason, each city and town had reported the storm happening at different times, but the pattern would always follow. Why 27 days? Why has there been 3 storms each season? By the light, what does it all mean, she wondered, wishing she could see the overall pattern in the mystery. Yet at the end of it all, Illarna could only allow herself the freedom to see the duty she was sworn to. I have been training for this for the better part of my life. If the Tal'dorin has indeed been reborn, I will be ready, no matter what, Illarna said, if only to reassure herself from doubt. For her whole life people had treated her differently than her brothers and sister. At first she thought it was the fact that she was the youngest, but once her father had another, she realised for some reason she was special, and on her 9th birthday she found out. Being the 9th child meant that she was to be shipped off to a remote part of the kingdom to be trained in the arts of war under the banner of the Phoenix. There she was allowed to find herself. No longer would she be told that her birth was cursed and that she would be the ruin of her lineage. No, instead she was allowed to prove her strength and her worth, and that is exactly what she did. Quickly she rose far above what her age would imply she was capable of, all before she was 15 years old. Now, 9 years later, she led not a single unit, but the entire force of maidens. If anyone was going to confront and slay the Tal'dorin before he awakens, it would be her, and by her sword she would not fail. She pulled the reins swiftly back and pushed her feet into the mare's side, inciting the steed to greater speed, and down the path they galloped. The majestic beast and Illarna fell in step as one, her cape catching the wind as it sliced through the air, casting a heroic figure for anyone lucky enough to catch her. The 9-foot-tall gilded doors to the hall swung open with a creaking boom. Herald enough Illarna moved with haste to present herself to the High Lord. Stepping into the great hall, Illarna always found it hard to hold her gaze from the large imposing stone warriors that ran down both sides of the long hall, each of them clad in meticulously crafted armour, burnished black from head to toe, silver and gold pauldrons crafted into the form of wings, bearing the symbology of the ruling house of the Valentor kingdom. A deep crimson cape wrapped itself around the cuff of the cuirass, itself bearing a red enamelled golden eagle embellished into a silver sun, with rays radiating outward at its centre. Considering it was already evening by the time Illarna finally arrived at the keep, she wondered why her father had not retired for the night. "Father!" Illarna called out as she burst into the final room, but to her surprise he was in deep conversation with several cloaked figures hidden from view by his guards. Receiving no answer, she moved closer, but as she did their conversation became clear, and instantly she realised that her initial thought had been correct. This is about the Tal'dorin, she thought, moving closer as her father's guards stepped aside to allow her passage. Standing adamant, Illarna tried to force a reaction from her father, but as he turned, she noticed that he was wearing a particularly fine coat made of velvet and silk, a choice she found quite peculiar. It's not like he normally walks around in drab garments or anything. Quite the contrary. No, this is something else, something different. A sudden wave of nausea hit her. She just wanted to be told what was going on, yet she knew better to expect anything of the sort from her father. What the hell do these priests have to do with anything? She wondered just as a number of the priests turned around, changing her nausea to hatred. Before she could speak, the foremost court herald began to announce her presence, calling out the long list of her achievements. Eyes rolling, Illarna flung her head backwards in such a dramatic fashion that she soon felt the whiplash. The Lady of the Phoenix, Illarna Valenkor. The herald continued title by title. All too familiar with how long this would take, Illarna fell back, crossing her arms in an expression of her growing agitation. The exercise growing ever more painful with each and every title spoken. Feeling the anger rising, Illarna turned, eyes burning. Shaken, the announcer sputtered the last of her titles in a shamble of words, wishing only to fall back into obscurity and away from her baleful gaze. A feeling many had shared over the years, for she could hardly handle psychopaths and fools without reveling in their discomfort and humiliation. A sentiment compounded when dealing with those who regarded themselves higher than everyone else. Yet in the end it was nothing more than an entertainment game for which she had grown tired. Announcements finally concluded. Illarna once again tried to speak, but this time she was beaten to it by her father.
Calm yourself, young phoenix. We have guests, and I would not have you making our guest even more uncomfortable than you already have,
he stated, locking eyes with his daughter in an effort to allow himself a moment's thought.
Illarna, I am proud of you, but I don't need this right now.
Impressed by her uncharacteristic silence, the High Lord smiled, turning to the first of the robed figures. Curious, Illarna followed his gaze, recognizing him immediately. Catching the glint of gold, her eyes shifted to the hideously garish, yet all too familiar golden chain upon the man's neck, as it dangled atop his heavy wool cloak, depicting an oversized serpent eating its own tail. Immediately realizing her father's intentions, Illarna's mood went from bad to worse. Are you serious? No way. I've already told you there is no way in hell that I am taking these. Illarna paused, trying to find the right word. Vermin.
Illarna, calm down.
Her father said, raising his hand to quiet her tongue.
I know you don't like the Brothers of Nadrid, but they have their own reasons to accompany you, and they will accompany you, Illarna, for that is my will. Besides, you should be pleased. They have vowed to assist you in your duty to kill the Tal'dorin.
Struggling to contain her rage, Illarna crossed her arms. You mean they pressured you into letting them join my quest? Enraged and fumbling over her own words, Illarna tried to point out the myriad of reasons why the priests should not be allowed to join her. But her father needed only shake his head once, and she knew the discussion was over.
Illarna, this is non-negotiable and that's final,
he said, as cold as the winter's rain.
As exemplified by your mastery of the sword, you have discipline, yet you still can't control your emotions. This is no way for the Lady of the Phoenix to behave.
Taking a moment's pause, the High Lord wondered whether she would listen.
Retire for the evening, for by the morning's dawn you must leave.
Infuriated, she resigned herself to the fact that there was no changing his mind, and so reluctantly bowed, withdrawing herself from the chamber.
So Illarna, I must ask, what will you do if we find this Tal'dorin and he happens to be a most handsome man?
A tall, raven-haired woman with jade eyes asked, her presence exuding a clearly mischievous streak, yet the woman remaining ever poised, ready to jump into action at a moment's notice. Recognizing the voice, Illarna smiled. While we may be the best of friends, Sylvain, my duty remains. I'll do what must be done. Turning back to her horse, Illarna smiled, remembering all the mischief they had found themselves in over the years. Placing the last of her belongings on the saddle, Illarna turned to Sylvain, a mischievous smile gleaming across her face. Well, if the man is truly handsome, I might be given pause.
Oh, I don't know about that, Illarna. Remember the time when...
Sylvain stopped as Illarna's hand flashed past her face. Shh, oh, by the light, what are you doing? Illarna exclaimed, arms thrown in the air. Sylvain's outburst of laughter caught everyone's attention, causing all in the vicinity to look over at the commotion on display. Sylvain lowered her voice in an effort to calm herself as she repeated a part of what Illarna had said previously.
But your duty remains, remember.
Illarna smirked, pulling tight the last buckle. This is different. I have been training my entire life for this battle. By the light, Sylvain, lives are at stake here. I cannot afford to be distracted by such trivialities. Might I also add, the incident you are referring to was a long time ago and no one got hurt.
Except for Zachary and maybe your father's pride.
Sylvain corrected, raising her eyebrows. Bursting into laughter, they both lost themselves to their emotions as they recalled the incident. Moments later, Anatole Massiere, the leader of the Brothers of Nadred, approached.
Should we not get moving, my lady? Or are you too happy to continue carrying on like a pair of starlings? We have at least a 4-day ride ahead of us before we reach the city of Ostalin, and at least 2 months to get to the border of Aldravar.
Sylvain saw Illarna's stance change for the worst, her anger radiating outwards for all to see. Noticing her hand shifting to her side, Sylvain realised that Illarna had already moved into a defensive posture. Training, taking control of her body, Sylvain turned to face Anatole, and in a single graceful motion she drew her eagle-crested sword forward, the tip grazing the heavy gold chain wrapped around the man's neck.
Hold your tongue, serpent. You speak to the Lady of the Phoenix.
Placing her hand on Sylvain's shoulder, Illarna whispered calmly, "It's okay, I got this." Sylvain swiftly softened her stance as she withdrew her sword, placing it back into its sheath. Again, locking her eyes with Anatole's, Illarna fought back against the raging anger that at every moment threatened to break free. Exerting great restraint, Illarna forced herself to once again suppress her emotions, hoping to keep at least a semblance of poise. Nevertheless, the anger still burned on her lips. "Think hard and remember the words I speak, Anatole. 100 paces, I will not warn you again." Illarna watched as Anatole fell away, her rage searing till the moment the man fell from sight. Relieved and eager to get on the way, Illarna mounted her horse and signalled the advance.
Chapter 3. Aftermath. Waking to cold sweat beating across his face, Therin raised his arm from the tangled sheets and wiped it away. Another nightmare, he pondered, looking at his outreached hand hovering above him. With a slight motion he swirled the motes of dust glistening in the hard light coming from the small window to the side of his temporary lodgings. They are getting worse. Letting out a deep sigh, he pulled the wolf pelt and shabby sheets away, his skin trembling as the cold washed over his bare body. Hastened, he pulled the trunk at the end of the bed around and retrieved what looked to be the last clean shirt. Lamenting the day, he looked to the window as if subconsciously searching for a light to guide him. Am I going to do this every year? Therin pulled the loose shirt on and turned searching for his pants draped over the chair in the corner. Pulling up his breeches, Therin looked out the window at a town bursting to life. People scurried about working like it was any other day. Irrationally irritated by their lack of care for the date, he turned to the door, buckling his belt before collecting the last of his possessions. With a rush of wind, the door suddenly burst open, revealing a stunning young woman with golden hair and eyes of ice blue. Startled and thrown off balance, he waited for her to explain the sudden intrusion.
"Therin,"
she exclaimed, her voice breaking as she attempted to regain her breath.
"the town guard.
She paused again to catch another.
They are looking for you."
Therin quickly closed the door behind himself and turned back, questions burning on his lips. How do you know this, Ava?
"Your mother sent me. She says you need to get out of the city and head to your old family farmstead up north. She said you should gather whatever you can and pick a direction."
Frozen from her words, Therin moved again to the window to see if the town guards were close by. Ava, please explain to me what you mean when you say the town guards are looking for me.
I don't really know, but it's being said that you struck the Baron's daughter,"
Ava added timidly. Taking a step back from the window, Therin tried to retain his advantageous view of the street from his room above the tavern without looking suspicious. Figures, that's the second time she has accused me of something I didn't do, and all within a 24-hour period. Therin looked back to Ava. She slapped me. I even have the cut to prove it. Therin turned, highlighting a shallow cut on his left cheek.
"It does not matter. In the mind of the city guard, you are already convicted. You are my closest friend, Therin. I refuse to stand by as you are hung as carrion for the birds above the city gate."
Ava reaffirmed. Noticing her pain, Therin shared a sympathetic look. For quite some time ago, he too had felt the all-too-familiar fright behind her frantic words. "It's okay, Ava. I will be fine, though I must ask. Did you see any guards on your way here?"
"No, but that's not to say there weren't any."
Taking a moment, she considered a solution.
"I guess you can cut through the kitchen. We might be able to sneak past the northern gate without anyone noticing. It's quite busy this time of the morning."
With a nod and spending the last few seconds glancing out the window, Therin moved towards Ava, his heart heavy with regret, as he moved to embrace his closest friend. "Thank you." Falling away from the heartfelt moment, Therin stepped into the hallway with Ava following closely behind. Moving timidly at first, they made their way to the stairs, eyes always glancing around to make sure there was no one around to see them. Quietly they made their way down the stairs and through the sparsely placed chairs and tables toward the kitchen. The only people present were the tavern keeper and a single maid. Seeing the keeper's curious look, Therin smiled and dropped a silver coin on the bar. "Do you mind if I use the back door?" The barkeep bowed his head knowingly and went about with his work. Seemingly unnoticed, they continued through until a cleaning lady whispered to get their attention.
Psst, young man, you cannot be here.
Only pausing as she noticed the look of anxiety growing on their faces.
Look, I saw what happened yesterday. That lass Frida has her sights on you, and trust me when I say this, that harpy will do anything she can to destroy you. What did you see exactly?
Ava said, her eyes focusing on the lady inquisitively.
Why, the young man here caught the Lady Frida in one of her little cons and confronted her, and in front of her retinue no less. And by the look of the cut on your face, that slap was as hard as it looked.
The lady pondered, her grim expression growing more frightful.
I fear your friend here is destined for the noose. We all know what her father is like. Why that harlot?
Ava exclaimed, furiously taking Therin's hand before storming out. The pleading lady could only smile as she watched the pair make their way to the back door, giving voice to the only thing she could think to say.
Good luck.
Finding themselves in the narrow alleys behind the dancing dragon, Ava took the lead scouting for guards. Slowly, yet methodically, they made their way through the narrow paths, until finally as the mid-morning sun reached its heights, they found themselves confronted by the northern gatehouse. Looking on in shock, Therin watched in alarm as a flood of people hastily shuffled through the city's gates, flooding into the streets. Observing the guards trying to stem the flow of people into the city, he wondered whether the other gates were hampered in a similar manner. Yet the question seemed pointless, as in the short time that he had been watching, the streets had already begun to overfill with people and their belongings. Speculating whether something had happened in the countryside, Therin realized it didn't really matter, for if he was going to go, he would need to go now, as time was swiftly running out. Turning to Ava, Therin chose his words carefully, knowing if he let her, she would come with him with little to no hesitation, for he feared she knew little of how dangerous it would be travelling upon unguarded roads, like the ones he would be forced to traverse on the path ahead, beset as they are so commonly by banditry and strife. Ava, please, can you go back to my mother and tell her that something bad is happening outside the city? Tell her what you saw here, and that she must prepare for whatever might be coming.
No, I am coming with you,
she said, defiant to remain by his side. Feeling the full weight of her words, Therin took a moment to consider his own. Please, I need you to do this for me. I need to know that my family will be warned, and believe me when I say it. I'll try and return within the week. I will not abandon my family.
But you know what the Baron will do if you come back.
Ava's eyes started to water as the feelings of rejection and loss that had held power over her for so long began to dissolve away, revealing her true feelings for him. Looking to Ava, Therin forced away his instinct to keep an eye on the gate. I'll be careful, but by the looks of things the city may be under siege within days.
But isn't that more of a reason for me to go with you?
Ava pleaded. Yes, but as I said, I need someone to tell my mother that I will be back.
Fine, I will stay, but you better come back,
Ava said, defeated, as she looked down, feeling a sickness swelling up in her stomach. Therin tried to put on a smile as he pulled her gaze back. It will be all right. I will return. Therin placed his right hand on her cheek, wiping a tear from her face, and kissed her on the forehead, whispering, I always seem to be thanking you. Finding herself blushing, Ava found it hard to let go of his hand, but before she could react, he had slipped into the crowd and disappeared. Making slow progress at first, Therin remained unnoticed, and by some sheer stroke of luck, he was able to move discreetly into a group navigating their way through the crowd. Hearing a guard shout, Therin turned, looking to the direction of the noise, but they were chastising a wagon owner trying to enter the city. With only a few guards still able to watch over the crowd, Therin took his chance and pushed forwards, breaking from the mass of men. Shifting into a paced walk, Therin wondered if he must appear strange going against the current of people trying to get into the city, but from this distance he felt confident that no one on the wall would be able to recognize him, nor would they be able to do anything about it. Yet thanks to that thought his paranoia took over, and he quickened his pace even more, remembering a small farmhouse a few kilometers up the road where he might be able to find a horse. Looking up at the midday sun as it reached its apex, Therin couldn't help but grow frustrated, as he knew that with every step his hope of finding a horse was getting slimmer. Exhausted, he stopped and stared back towards the city, which was now just a smear of walls far on the horizon. Hoping the decision was the right one, Therin began walking again, a water skin and a few days' worth of bread hanging by his side in a Hessian bag, for they were the only things he was able to convince the farmer to sell, and not to mention at a very steep price. Trying to calculate how long it would take to reach his old home by foot, Therin couldn't help but curse about the amount of time he was wasting without a horse. Walking down a slight hill, Therin heard the distinct gallop of horses coming up behind. Looking around to find a place to hide, he soon realized the horsemen were galloping harder than he first thought. Knowing he was quickly running out of time, Therin moved to the side of the road and waited discreetly, hoping to see that the riders were not of the town's guard. Slowly the group appeared over the crest, and Therin breathed a sigh of relief, yet his initial anxiety was quickly replaced by curiosity. Noticing the white cloaks flagging in the wind, Therin concluded the men were not from Roland's Gap, but that only begged the question of whom they might be. One by one the riders flashed past, the gleam of their polished armour catching the retreating sun. Trying not to gasp at the sight, Therin noticed that the silver and gold dragon flaring from white cloaks looked almost identical to the symbol his father bore on his right forearm. Noticing his recognition, the last of the riders reined in his horse. "Traveller or a local?" the man said, taking great care to control his horse. Therin looked to the man sparingly. "Roland's Gap, actually, but my family owns a farm to the north on the edge of the Amberwoods." "A free man. Good. I ask because I noticed you eyeing the Drakasvordar. I'm guessing you have seen it before." Halting for a moment, the rider looked to the rest of his group who were just now beginning to return. "Pardon, lad. Balin's the name," the rider said, turning back. "Would you by chance know a man named Illarna Ald'rune?" Shocked to hear his father's name, Therin found it hard to speak. "Ah, yes. Forcing a breath, Therin tried again, not sure if he was willing to share the fact that he was himself Illarna Ald'rune's son. "Apologies, Sir Balin, but Illarna Ald'rune passed from this world long ago." "That is truly dire news, lad. I held out hope that he would ride with us again. He was a dear friend to me, and an even greater marshal." The man trailed off, taking a moment clearly affected by the news. "There is no need to call me sir, just Balin will suffice," he insisted, allowing himself a slight smile as his companions rode up beside him. "Young man, could you by chance direct us to Illarna's kin? I would like to pay my respects." Therin looked past Balin as his thoughts naturally returned to his father. "I am afraid it would do you no good. The farmhouse was abandoned years ago, and his kin now lives in Roland's Gap." "All the same, I would like to see the home of Illarna." Balin continued looking at the falling sun. Trying to consider why these men would want to visit the farmhouse, Therin figured if he could use his cards right, he might just get a ride. "I could point to the house on a map, but if you still intend to go, I could just as easily take you there myself, but I haven't a horse." Balin turned, speaking to the first of the gathered riders. "Tenam, you and Vernar will return to Roland's Gap. From there you will take command of the city's militia under the banner of Drakasvordar and keep a watch over the northern passes." Both nodding, the two men fell to their orders. Taking the mare's reins in hand, Therin pulled himself up and over the horse, struggling to get his balance. For a moment he feared that he wouldn't be able to get the mare under control, yet with a little effort and a whole lot of willpower, he was able to turn the horse north. As if willed by fate, a gust of wind whirled up around him and a fine frost hung in the air. The once dominant sun now rested behind a thick blanket of clouds while a light snow had just begun to fall. Turning to Balin, Therin noticed an amused expression resting on the man's face and smiled. "We should hurry, looks like a storm is brewing." Waiting for a sign of agreement, he watched as Balin raised his hand in a motion to command the riders to fall in. Realizing everyone was waiting on him, Therin pressed his ankles into the horse's side, inciting the mare into a sudden gallop. Startled at first, Therin quickly fell into a rhythm, his mind wandering to darker memories not explored for a long time. Having rode for hours and feeling the bitter bite of chilling winds pressing against his face, Therin looked up from the road for a moment. Before him stretched the mighty mountains that had stood ever vigil over the northern reaches of his homeland. Eyes wide, he felt a sudden pull as the world began to shift and sway. The sun's light suddenly blazed to life, breaking through the clouds before dissolving them entirely. The very reality of the world seemed to shake as the sun's laurels fell behind the edge of Aldothea, its glory giving way to a star-filled night sky almost as ardent as the dawn. Great ribbons of green, blue and red caressed the heavens as the air sung whispering in tongues long lost to the ears of man, and soon strange arcs of light began to rise from the ground in long strands of pearlescent silk, reaching for their starlight brethren. Shifting once more, the gleaming luminosity of the world fell from his eyes, yet Therin refused to look away. Not in fear, but in hope, for he had felt this before, but this time he could feel the very winds around him change, and with it he knew that something momentous was about to happen. Chapter 4. By the grace of gentle moonlight, Therin and the riders drew ever northward through a land barely recognizable. His horse's slow yet rhythmic stride proving the perfect conditions for his mind to wander, as he remembered the lands of his childhood now forever changed by a near-constant winter. Eyes darting back and forth as he traversed the land all but foreign to him. Therin knew he must go on, yet in doing so he was forced to adjust his mount's motion by instinct alone, driving it on a path he could only see in his mind. Fatigued, he frequently attempted to search across the expanse for the faintest of recollections, but with every attempt he would only find a wealth of painful memories, and yet he knew that he must endure, for with every stride taken, the snow would grow harder and more difficult to traverse. Winds freezing and progress near non-existent, Therin searched for any sign of human habitation, but to his surprise he instead caught an emerald glow of a Tal'dar, standing defiant in a field of ice, its emerald crown shining like a beacon from a backdrop of unblemished snow. Bewildered by the sight, Therin could only stare, as he continued wondering what it could possibly be. After a short time, memories began to flood back until one specific moment held dominance over his mind. Surprised by the echoing sound of his father's voice, Therin maintained his composure and listened.
Ne clot, a rare yet sacred species of Tal'dar. Though once widespread, the species now only grows on the slopes of Mount Akros, though why, even I hazard to guess. Lad, what draws you so?
Balin remarked, breaking Therin's trance. Startled and nearly falling from his saddle, Therin turned to Balin. Just past this grove we should find a path to the farmstead.
That tree over there,
Balin asked, lifting his hand as he looked to the thicket with the Tal'dar at its heart.
It kind of looks like an alder.
Therin considered for a moment, wondering whether Balin had noticed he had been looking at the Tal'dar earlier, for he had never met anyone else who could see their subtle glow. Anyone besides his father, that was. My father once called them Tal'dars. Therin paused for a moment, studying the tree again. I thought it might have been the same tree my father planted when I was a child, but the winters have hardly let up for the past 9 years, so I'm not so sure I could tell either way.
Wait, are you saying that it has been snowing for 9 years?
Balin paused, realizing the ramifications.
I am no farmer, but I am sure most plants couldn't grow well in these conditions.
Therin looked back to Balin, recalling something. You're right, I can't imagine much could have grown in these conditions either, but we should still investigate. I just can't shake the feeling that it's the same tree.
Lad, the tree is nearly 20 meters tall. It must be 100 years old at least.
Seeing Balin's growing frustration, Therin hastened his voice. I understand, but please humor me. We are almost there. The group rode for a time, and just as Therin had said, they found a small disused path marked by an old broken gate. To one side, a beam hung, its inscription worn away by the passage of time, yet 3 letters held shape. An A, an L, and a D. Therin stopped, a wave of emotion filling his mind. The house should be a couple 100 meters up the path.
Lad, will you be staying here as well, or do you plan to continue your journey alone?
Balin questioned, clearly seeing the emotion on his face. Therin moved his horse forward, treading carefully through the snow. I will camp for the night, but I must leave at first light. My destination is still quite far, and I must reach it before dark. What about you, Balin? Will you be camping here long?
No, like you, we can only stay the night.
Therin continued down the barely visible path until it opened, revealing a wooden house half buried beneath the snow. As the view of the front door came into sight, Therin felt helplessly sad as a sudden wave of emotion washed over him. Though faint at first, an apparition of his mother appeared before him not too far in the distance, her very form coalescing for the snow and winds of his old home. Suddenly he watched as his younger sister stepped out from some unknown place and took their mother's hand, and soon the remainder of his brothers and sisters appeared playing atop a wooden cart. Whispered away upon the winds, the ghostly figures fell from sight, leaving a lone reflection of his younger self staring at his present. Paler than a ghost, Therin heard a distant voice which brought him back to reality. Sorry, did you say something?
Are you all right, lad? You look as though you have seen a ghost.
Balin replied, hand holding tight to his sword. My apologies, something very unpleasant happened here, but fear not, it was a long time ago.
Well, as I was saying, I could use a lad like you. The Dragon Guard is always looking for new blood to join the ranks. You are smart, clear-spoken, and better yet, you appear to have an education far above your station.
Balin pondered his last words carefully.
I have been meaning to ask, how did you know the Ald'rune family?
Stepping from his horse, Therin looked to Balin, a solemn expression resting on his face. Agenor was my father. As the words left his lips, a weight lifted from his shoulders. Please realize that I never intended to mislead you. Therin paused, leading his horse to a wooden structure to the side of the house. We should be able to leave the horses here. Handing over the borrowed reins, Therin pulled open the large barn doors, revealing an empty space easily large enough to hold twice their number.
I thought as much. You carry yourself much like him.
Balin placed his hand on Therin's shoulder.
Your father was a great man and mentor. I'm saddened by his passing, and even more so that it happened without me knowing.
Therin looked to Balin. How did you know my father?
He was the Marshal of the Dragon Guard when I joined, and for 20 years he led us into many impossible situations. Yet somehow he always seemed to be able to lead us back out of them. Even the king knew better than to question his wisdom.
Balin paused a moment, his words lingering.
Lad, I remember well the years that your father led the dragons against the many thousands of Valentian raiders terrorizing the lowlands of Estwald.
My father, Marshal of the Dragons. He never told us of any of this. Therin pondered, moving toward the farmstead, their paths hampered by snow. Requiring no instruction, Therin set about to clear the path with Balin, quickly moving to help. Making hard progress, Therin turned to Balin. I was just thinking, I thought only the nobility could lead men into war.
I'm afraid I don't really know the details. However, while this is true in your father's case, I've never seen a man so adept at commanding. He truly was a force to be reckoned with.
Hearing a ruckus brewing behind them, Balin's expression grimmed.
We will continue this later. It looks as though I have some slackabouts to discipline.
Therin smiled, scraping the last of the snow from the door, and with a well-placed palm he released the bolt from its restraint. Slowly and with a little more effort, the door swung open, releasing a wave of stale air. Fortifying himself, Therin entered, every moment bringing rise to new waves of emotions and memories thought long forgotten. Fueled on by emotion alone, Therin followed his feet to his parents' door. Summoning what courage he could muster, Therin pushed open the frail door that he once thought so mighty. Yet to his surprise, the room was not bathed in darkness, as he had expected, but rather he found it lit by the soft, yet subtle shades of exquisite moonlight. Stepping through the door, Therin studied the empty space where the ceiling used to be. Spotting a glint of metal on the far wall, Therin moved to investigate, each step taking great effort as the snow-covered floor gave way in unpredictable ways. Reaching the gleaming metal, Therin reached forward, wiping the snow from its surface, revealing a stave of a magnificently gilded heartwood. With a firm grip, Therin pulled it free from its prison of snow, revealing a bow so fine it would be fit for a king. Feeling a sting of shame, he found himself hoping the wood had not rotted from its time sitting unprotected from the elements of nature. Yet in the motions of inspecting the bow, a second item drew his attention. Therin's eyes bulged as he brushed away another layer of snow, revealing a pair of swords somehow even finer than the bow. With deft hands, he carefully placed it against the wall and pulled the first sword from its snowy prison, then reached for the second blade. Turning to catch the moonlight, Therin carefully inspected the fine detail etched into the hilt and followed it as it transitioned into the scabbard. Raising the second sword, he noticed this one appeared to be a foot longer than the first, along with a white gold chain and pendant wrapped from the hilt to the sheath. With a light force, Therin slowly drew the sword until the chain binding it stayed his hand. Freeing his grip, the sword softly slid back into its sheath, with an etheric chime sounding as the blade fell to rest. Yet to his surprise, the binding chain began to shift unnaturally across the hilt. Suddenly it shattered into a cloud of silver dust, leaving only the pendant falling to the ground. Taken aback, Therin turned away his fears and kneeled to investigate, but peculiarly the snow had retreated and begun to pool. Without thought he reached out and grasped the pendant, but instantly jerked back. Ow! A gasp, Therin rubbed his hand in shock as the pendant began to glow from the increasing heat. Swords in hand, Therin stepped back, feeling a strange force pushing at him. With the wind suddenly stirring, Therin tried to turn, but quickly realized his body had become trapped by an unknown force. Thinking only to free himself, Therin soon felt his hands being pulled forth in a most agonizing manner. Arms extended and his fingers stretched, the swords fell from his grip, yet they only dropped for a fleeting moment before freezing mid-air. Scabbards slipping away, the steel of the blades swayed unnaturally, as if the metal had come to life, shining a brilliant white in the moon's soft light. Feeling the full force of whatever magic was at work, Therin began to panic as an odd static feeling was permeating through his body. With a silent scream, the room grew bright before exploding into white flames, burning away all but the most stubborn of things. Pulling his aching muscles from the floor, Therin looked around at the desolate room, yet there was not a trace of snow to be seen. Mind racing for answers, the door behind him suddenly slammed open, its hinges shattering from the force. Mouths gaping, the three men could only look on in shock at first before stumbling in. The only one capable of making a voice, it seems, was Balin. By the Tal, what happened? Noticing Therin was barely able to stand, Balin moved in to help, but then hesitated as his eyes fell on his clothing, burning in odd patterns across his entire body, save for his face. Balin stepped forward again, but this time he pulled up Therin's sleeve. With a gasp and falling to caution, he stepped back. Shocked and with sword now in hand, Balin eyed the pair of dragons, one white and another blue, wrapping themselves around Therin's arm, shimmering brilliantly with a light as intense as the dawning sun. Therin staggered a step before collapsing to the ground once again, but this time he now stared straight up into the sky. "I do not feel right," he said in a whisper. Balin moved towards him timidly. "Nor do you look right, lad." Balin waited a moment for a reply but didn't get one, and so moved in to pick Therin up. "Boy, how can this be? No one has been able to unsheathe the fangs." Feeling for a pulse, Balin started dragging Therin through the door. "It's supposed to be impossible, unless..." Balin stopped his train of thought, fearing the answers he may find. Therin tried to straighten out his thoughts, but came to find no answers. What happened? I do not remember. Eyes ever drawn to the dragons moving across Therin's arms, Balin spoke gently. "By the light, by the Tal, it cannot be." Finding a small pile of leathers, Balin carefully lowered Therin to the floor. "Be careful, lad. Don't try to get up. Tal enchantments are incredibly powerful, and as far as I'm aware, this particular one may be far older than most." Therin spoke weakly. "Tal? What do you mean by that?" "I speak of magic, lad. Though His Majesty, the King, sometimes likens it to the blood of dragons, but everyone knows that he has always been too poetic for his own good. Others far more learned than I have described it more like a river, or maybe a well. I'm not too sure of the nomenclature, honestly." Balin paused, seeing Therin's confusion. "It's in the prophecies, lad. The Tal'dorin will return at the end of time to stand before the night, our last light as it were. There are other less hopeful versions of the prophecy as well, but I don't really care for those." Instinctively, Therin reached out for the swords now laying on the floor beside him. An enchantment. Perhaps that is why I can hear them whispering. "What do you mean they are whispering?" Balin questioned, haunted by Therin's look. "Sorry, I must have misspoken. I guess it could just be noise, but it sounds like it should be words, but I fear I do not know them." Therin paused a moment, distracted. "I know this is going to sound absurd, but I think they might be angry, because they keep repeating the same pattern of words." Therin staggered a few times as he spoke, yet through the sheer exhaustion of the ordeal, sleep quickly took root, and he fell, slumped to one side.
Chapter 5. The warmth of dawn flooded over the snow-capped peaks of the eastern ranges, its hard gaze forcing the mists of night into retreat, sheltering in the mountain's shadow where they could find but a moment's refuge from the sun's rising glory. The night's chilled air danced with the acquired scents of campfires and stewing pots, and the youth of spring held sparingly to the night's latent dew still lingering but a little longer upon the morning breeze. Comfortable under her sheets, the scents proved too strong and drew the maiden from her slumber. Sitting up barely coherent, Illarna soon realised she was the last to awaken, so she grabbed her cloak and moved her way outside. As she drew open the tent, the morning's light washed over her like a warm blanket, but a dark chill still lingered in the air, its bite quickly raising the hairs on her arms. Pushing the cold from her mind, Illarna pulled her cloak over her shoulders, all the while looking around from the heights her position provided. To her pride, a large cluster of tents stood swaying against the cool breeze. Between the white gilded tents, the maidens moved about with purpose, the fragrance from their morning meals still hanging in the air. Lingering on the scene before her, she noticed Sylvain approaching with food and a hot beverage in hand.
She finally awakens.
Unable to hold her smile, Illarna tried to steer the conversation away from her sleeping mishap. What is with this mist? We are halfway through spring, and yet it grows even colder. Stopping herself, Illarna realised she was not surprised in the least. Just look at all the unusual weather we have been dealing with these past few years.
It does line up with the stories that we were told, though it still seems surreal to actually see it come to reality in our lifetime. We have barely started this journey, and I fear the world already feels different.
Sylvain finished thinking back on all the reports of strange events. Forcing down a yawn, Illarna lifted another spoonful of soup from her bowl. It's been 3 days now since we left Valentia. Illarna paused to finish the mouthful of food. It's strange, I have been experiencing these dreams every night since we left, but I can't really explain it, though for some reason I feel they are important. Illarna pondered, trying to recall and organise the details in her mind. I just don't understand it. It's confusing because I remember the dream vividly when I wake, but within seconds it begins to fragment.
Dreams are funny like that, La,
Sylvain responded, passing over a drink.
They aren't supposed to make sense, though I guess you could find a dream walker, but that's not my forte.
Skeptical, Illarna continued. Do you really think there are people out there that can do that?
Sure, why not? It is said that the Tal for one can do all sorts of strange things, so I don't see why there wouldn't be others out there who could venture into the world of dreams.
Pulling her cup close, Illarna looked past Sylvain to a group of maidens talking in the distance. I suppose you're right. It's just that it feels different, and it's really getting under my skin. Taking a sip of the heated beverage, Illarna smiled. Kagawa, at this rate we won't have any for the trip back.
Hey, we should enjoy it while we can. Who knows what might happen, besides you're just trying to change the subject.
Knowing it was a long shot at best, Illarna begrudgingly complied. By the Tal. Okay, I'll describe what I remember. Reaching for the memories as best as she could, Illarna focused. It always seems to start with me running from something, until all that's left is smoke. Completely lost, I begin to wander aimlessly until after what seems like ages, exhausted, I finally stop. But to my surprise, a man steps out from the fog, standing at least half a foot taller than myself. Seemingly unaware of my presence, the man just stands there, until suddenly he shifts his gaze and stares at me with blazing blue eyes that seem to shimmer silver in reflected light. He had brown hair, short, but in a strange fashion, and his skin, though fair and youthful, appeared to have seen its fair share of labour. Noticing the smile growing on Sylvain's face, Illarna sighed. Oh, by the Tal.
Sorry, this just reminds me of when we first met all those years ago.
Sylvain said, falling back in her seat, letting her memories run wild. Embarrassed, Illarna tilted her head slightly towards Sylvain, letting out a half smile. Anyway, the dream was completely devoid of emotion. As I said, it just feels different.
Maybe we are thinking too deep into the matter. Maybe the dream is just a dream. You have been stressed and agitated since you found out about your father's orders to allow the brothers of Nadrid to accompany us.
You're probably right. They have already gotten under my skin.
You don't even have to be near them. Just by mentioning the Brotherhood, you get all tense.
I just don't trust them, never have, never will. Something about them is off. I just don't know what it is yet.
They are a cult. Of course something is off.
Grumbling to her feet, Illarna looked around. True, I'm starting to regret ever letting Father dictate the matter. Taking a moment, she looked to the height of the sun before turning back to Sylvain. We should break camp, otherwise we won't reach the next village before nightfall.
By the Tal, I am glad we are almost at Rennum. My backside is raw and my water skin will barely last another day,
expressed a maiden sitting atop her horse of average height but of rare beauty, her visage elevated even more by her slender athletic build. Her dark blonde hair held still by a floral clasp, her green eyes shone with passion relaying the rarity of her lineage. Her soft demeanour hid a very capable and agile warrior, her skill and finesse with a sword rivaling even that of Illarna. Her stature carved of grace called to the hearts of men, but the underestimation of her skills proved the bane of many.
I understand what you mean, Avril. I could go for some mead myself.
A second maiden replied, a woman known well to the maidens. Morella was the name given, however none knew of her house and she never spoke of it, but all knew she was the one to go to for help, for she stood a virtuous person well known to be worthy of trust. Many view her as the mother of the maidens, for she spent every effort making sure everyone found themselves taken care of, and in the times that she was not needed, she enjoyed her time spent drinking mead and revelling in the spectacle of those who can't hold their temper. The thought made Illarna smile because this left more time for her to handle more serious issues.
Of course you do. Mead is but the fuel you use to burn brighter.
Sylvain smiled, knowing she was all too serious.
Too right, it is. Life would be boring without a drink in hand. Where do you think all those stories come from?
Morella replied, though I doubt you can remember much after the fact, hey Morella, Avril said, smiling, remembering the aftermath of Morella's last adventure into a tavern.
And that is why I always bring someone like you along, someone far more responsible with your drink than I. That way you can tell the tale on my behalf. That doesn't smell good,
Sylvain said, her attention being diverted by the smell of smoke on the wind. Stopping by her horse, Illarna began to look around for smoke on the horizon, but instead found her forward scout returning at full speed. Well, we are about to find out.
Illarna,
Sylvain said, leaning into her direction, as the memory of Illarna's dream is fresh on her mind.
About your dream, do you think that maybe the fire and smoke has something to do with this?
Illarna thought for a moment. It's uncanny, but I don't know how this fire could be relevant to me in any way.
I don't know.
You know, for someone who holds a lot of knowledge, you got nothing for me?
I could repeat what I heard or read in books about the Dreamwalkers in the library, but we both know where you lie with the subject. You should maybe try reading sometime. You never know what you might find, and Tal forbid you might enjoy it.
I can hardly be held to that account. They are so mind-numbingly dreary. Maybe if there was something of interest, I wouldn't fall asleep every time I tried. Attention drawn to the sound of hoofs, Illarna turned to the scouts returning and waited. The scout took a brief moment, gasping before beginning her report. "My lady, there is a grass fire burning northwest of our position on the other side of the town. If the winds do not change, all the villages in the area are in danger." Concern growing visibly on her face, Illarna knew she would, in this moment, need to make a choice. But could she really just leave the villagers to their fate? The decision grated at her, for she knew she did not have the time to involve herself in this, and furthermore her training was very clear on the matter. Each and every one of her instructors would have said the same thing. She should move past and continue her quest. Unable to stomach the thought, she turned to the scout leader, Helena. "How long until it hits one of the villages?" "It could be a matter of hours or days, my lady. It's hard to tell," the maiden scout replied, waiting for Illarna's command. Noticing the strain in her face, Helena pressed for an answer. "What are your orders, my lady?" Eyes knowing Illarna struggled to say the words. "We move towards the fire," she answered, the words falling from her mouth with a final breath of relief, for in her heart she knew she had made the right decision. Hearing another horse coming up behind her, Illarna turned around, and as soon as her eyes fell on the man, her demeanour fell.
I know what you are thinking. However, we do not have time to waste on these mere villages. Just let it burn. We need to get to the city of Ostalen.
Anatole commanded, the condescension clear in his voice as he pulled back the reins on his horse. Silence fell as Anatole's words hung in the air, but the maidens remained poised to defend their phoenix, if only Illarna would give them the word. "First of all, what the hell happened to 100 paces?" she snapped.
Do you not understand the utmost importance of this mission? This is not some minor adventure through the grasslands. We are here to slay a dragon. Nothing else is of any importance. If he is allowed to roam free, your lands will perish along with everyone else's.
Anatole said, raising his voice to reinforce his position on the matter. Anger rising up, Illarna was unable to keep civilized. "Watch your tongue. I am the Lady of the Phoenix. I do not take orders from anyone other than the king. A position far above you, serpent. Why my father keeps you and your cult around is beyond my comprehension, but mark my words, if you speak to me in that fashion again, it will no longer matter."
In that case, I will grant you your wish, little phoenix. I need not tolerate this blasphemy. No one disrespects the brothers of Nadrid. Valentir will no longer have our allegiance, and as such we shall go our separate ways.
Turning to leave, Anatole gave a final threat.
We will see who finds the dragon first, my lady.
Illarna should have left it there. Instead, however, she yelled out as he galloped back to his brethren. "To whatever dark deity to which you pray, I hope they give you the strength to put up a fight, for I would hate the dragon to beat my blade to your neck." Calming herself, she turned back to her maidens. A wave of relief washed over her as she allowed herself a few whispered moments to escape her vice-like control. "I wish I had confronted him earlier, no matter the orders." Illarna couldn't help but find herself wondering, might the Tal'dorin save me the trouble? That's if they even get past the border. It's well known the kingdom of Ald'rune has little to no love for any other than the Tal themselves. That being said, it's going to be a problem we will need to face at some point as well.
Chapter 6. Reaching out across the serene waters of his mind, Therin found himself growing agitated as the apparent lack of control gradually dawned on him. Trying to scrape back some semblance of self-determination, he forced open his eyes. Yet to his surprise, he did not see the stars of his last memory, but an infinite sea of mist hanging stagnant in the chilled air of this eerily empty space. Disjointed and apprehensive, Therin suddenly realized that he could not perceive any sound. Yet, just as the realization dawned, a sudden and all-encompassing orchestra of great bells rang out, reverberating from every direction in a deafening blitz of sensations and pain. However, just as they had begun in an instant, the bells fell away, leaving but a deathly silence to fill the void. Heart now pounding from his chest, Therin's eyes darted across the infinite sea, once again looking for a semblance of form. But its motions, though strong, seemed to embody the currents of chaos itself. Although as time slowly passed, a shockingly controlled pattern soon emerged as the different segments of the mist began to stir in an odd, unnatural fashion, its churning seemingly beginning to react to his very breath. Feeling a strange and sudden instability in his footing, Therin slowly looked down in horror at what he had thought was solid ground. But to his dismay, he found instead a calm yet shifting black liquid sloshing about beneath him. Panicked, Therin shifted his feet in search of what he hoped to be a more suitable foundation, but with every effort he took, the liquid beneath him riled harder. Forcing his racing heart and panic aside, Therin closed his eyes in hopes to wake himself from this nightmare. Yet no matter how hard he tried to will this horrid world away, he would always feel the same cold breath upon his skin, and he would instantly know he remained. Taking in one last breath, he tried his best to release all the remaining tension in his body. Mind silent and heart beginning to slow, he opened his eyes and exhaled. To his disdain, the environment had not returned to that of the world he was familiar, but there was a mercy for as he instinctively looked down at the dark fluid at his feet. Its surface now appeared almost completely still, not unlike the appearance you would get from polished stone. Suddenly, and without any apparent reason, all the hairs on his arms stood on end, and a chilling feeling began to rise up within his soul, until the sensation to run was all that was left. Bursting into a sudden leap, Therin struggled against the liquid, instantly reacting to his flight, its surface quickly shifting into a churning sea of rising waves and shifting winds. With every stride taken, Therin grew more confused, yet his legs refused to tire. Before long, he began to wonder. What was he running from, or as he soon thought more relevant, where was he running to? Yet the sensation remained, and he felt that he must continue. Hours seemed to pass, and still he did not tire, until suddenly the feeling left him entirely. Unable to understand what was going on, Therin looked around, but the storm had gone and the sea beneath him had once again calmed. Curious, and considering that he must be stuck in a dream, Therin looked around for anything he might use to peer through the mist. Yet it was of no use, for this place was as desolate as the deepest of places a man could go. Wishing to avoid a repeat of before, he took another deep breath and instead remained still as he watched the mist move around him. At first it churned, and turned about in what seemed to be an endlessly random manner, falling in on itself again and again. Yet after a time the mist had folded so much that it was gone, leaving only a black sphere the size of a fist suspended in the air. Cursed with an insatiable curiosity, Therin reached out his right hand and touched the ball. Pressed ever so slightly, the ball swiftly darted back and enlarged into a nondescript figure. A long moment passed before an unexpectedly low, cold voice thundered from the somewhat solid form. "Who stands before the shadow?" The low rumble echoed for a moment as Therin held silent, reluctant to answer. "I don't believe we have ever met, heir to the dragon's blood." Fighting his own fear, Therin forced the words from his mind. "What do you mean, heir of the dragon?" "It means perhaps with training you can wield the Tal mortal, but are you the Tal'dorin? I think not. You are too dim and far too weak, yet still useful, I guess. You will serve." Swaying on insubstantial air currents, the shadow continued to speak. "More questions I see. Ask, while I feel of mine to answer." Fearing what his silence would mean for his life, Therin began to speak. "What do you mean by Tal'dorin?" "Chief of his realm, Rinn is the dragon of time, or so he would have everyone believe. But time merely flows to he who sits upon the throne. So no, he is no abstract lord or king. He is simply absent, fallen, thrown aside by that which he held most dear, leaving behind nothing more than a novel interpretation of an old idea. He was simply the first to fail, where the eight will soon follow." "The dragons, who are they and why did they fail? And by the light, what creature of the night are you supposed to be?" "Ha ha!" The shadow laughed, billowing forth elated by his candor. "You mortals really are short-lived. Dragons are beasts born of stardust. They have railed against my design since the beginning, and they will probably do so until the end. Like your kind, they are dim of mind and unable to see what is right in front of them. As for me, boy, I am no creature, I am death, and I am rebirth. I am the two sides of the same coin, and no matter your mind, you will serve." Defiant, Therin raised his voice. "No, I will not serve you or any creature of the shadows, be they gods or beasts. There has been much talk about magic, death, and dragons from you, so much darkness in which you speak. I am Therin Lyos Ald'rune, son of Agenor Fawn Ald'rune, and I will always stand in the light. You are no Ald'rune boy, nor should you want to be." The shadow suddenly stopped speaking for a moment as he noticed something quite unexpected. Feeling his arms begin to burn, Therin looked down, seeing the dragons peering through the darkness. Soon there were many of them all swirling about, filling him with energy. Looking up at the shadow retreating, Therin's eyes shifted to a giant scythe forming from its reaching hand. With great speed and accuracy, the shadow charged forth and swung its mighty weapon aloft, bringing its immense heft down on Therin's head. But for some reason it stopped only a few inches away, its narrow point impacting a barrier formed of the same light beaming from the dragons burning across his body. The shadow raged and billowed before retreating once again, his weapon remaining ever pointed towards Therin's throat. "You are in my world, boy. Your Tal tricks will not save you." With great heft, the scythe was again raised in the air, but before it could come down, a brilliant light shone from Therin's heart, washing away the darkness. Jolting from his sleep as the bells rang anew, Therin looked across the room searching for danger. Yet the room was empty, save for the light of daybreak flooding through even the smallest of spaces that filled this once homely building. Reminded of the last moments of his dream, Therin looked to his arms, but the light was gone. Panicked, he turned looking for the swords he could so vividly remember, but they were also nowhere to be found. Staggering to his feet with the weight of 3 days' sleep dragging at his heels, Therin moved to the stables looking for the horses, but they too were gone. Turning back, Therin looked to the main entrance searching for signs of people's passing imprinted in the snow. Spotting what appeared to be fresh tracks, Therin figured they could be no older than a day or two. Stomach growling, Therin suddenly felt the dry sweats of thirst, so went back inside looking for his backpack. Scrounging around for longer than he liked, Therin felt dismayed that he could only find a single water skin and a few pieces of bad bread. With a sigh, he made his way to his parents' room but stopped at the door, memories of his ordeal proving a capable barrier. Regaining his strength, Therin stepped through and plucked the bow from the far wall, wrapping his hand tightly around the familiar heft. Feeling a smile, he moved to leave, but a stray thought crossed his mind. This is probably the last time I will see this place. Allowing himself a moment, Therin looked back for just long enough to imprint the memory so that he might remember it in time. Grabbing the rest of his belongings, Therin braced himself as he reached the front door, the wind's freezing bite reminding him the hunt would not be so easy. Going through his bag, Therin pulled a length of bowstring from its contents, but sighed as the threads began to unwind at the slightest of manipulation. Casting it aside out of frustration, he suddenly remembered his father had stored some of his tools and weapons in a trunk all those years ago. Pushing the old door open one last time, Therin stepped out to the dawning brilliance of Sol blinding his eyes. Pausing to acclimatize, he focused his gaze and looked across the property, trying to think where his father might have hidden his belongings. Yet as hard as he tried, the memory remained elusive. Racking his brain, Therin almost gave up, but as he turned around, the old Tal'dar tree suddenly stood out. Figuring it was as good a place as any to start, Therin walked over and with a little effort, he dislodged the 9th post on the house side of the tree. Taking the roughest knife from his bag, he began to dig, yet the ground proved harder than he thought. Exerting a greater deal of energy than he would have liked, he sifted through the dirt, but nothing was there to be found. Taking a breath, Therin looked around again, knowing all too well that time was running out. Casting a glance back at the tree, he shrugged, figuring he might as well try the other side. Again he counted 9 posts down the fence and thrust his blade into the earth, and to his surprise this time it hit steel. Pulling frantically at the hard soil, he quickly pulled the box from the ground and rested it against the tree. With 3 well-placed strikes from his quickly dulling blade, the lock clicked as it fell free. Pulling back the lid, Therin's eyes fell on a blanket, draped over to what appeared to be a suit of hard leather clothing lined with fur. Beside it laid at least a few hundred arrows, a few small daggers, a fighting axe, and a finely wound spool of spectra silk that looked like it would be usable in his bow. Growing emotional, Therin placed his hand on his chest and thanked his father in a way only a son could. Winds rallying, Therin quickly finished and pulled the box to the barn. Finding a table, he grabbed what arrows he could feasibly hold and bound them tightly together before placing them aside with the few daggers he could find. Pulling the silk thread from the box, Therin began to unwind it until it reached the desired length. Cutting it off with the sharpest dagger, he then did the same with 2 more lengths before placing the spool back in his bag. Focusing as best he could in this frigid cold, so ill-equipped that he was, Therin took great care as he spliced the ends, for he knew failure was most likely to happen at this very point. Finally happy with the tension, he did the same to the rest, placing the finished strings in his backpack save for the last, which he strung over the end of his father's bow. First testing the tension with little to no weight, Therin slowly drew the bow across his chest and smiled in relief as the bow bent in a smooth motion. Deciding it best to test a live arrow, he pulled a single shaft from the box and fired it into the door of the barn. Eyes wide, Therin could hardly believe how smooth of an action it was. Seems I haven't forgotten how to use a bow then. Placing it down on the table, Therin returned to the box and pulled the hard leather coat out next. Finding himself pleasantly surprised, Therin realized he must be a similar size to his father. Yet the unnerving reality that he would be wearing his father's last coat nagged at his mind. As a sudden gust of freezing air rushed through the partially open barn door, his mind was quickly decided. Pulling the coat over his shirt, Therin twisted and turned and found himself quite surprised by how flexible the leather had remained after all this time. Thanking his father once again, Therin looked back at the bundle of arrows and wondered if there was something he could find that would make them a little easier to carry. Making his way back into the house in search of his mother's sewing supplies, Therin welcomed a little luck as he noticed a half-fallen cupboard leaning precariously from the far right wall. Accidentally pulling away the entire door, hinge and all, Therin quickly realized he had found all that he would need, as well as some unused lengths of leathers. Grabbing the materials, he quickly crafted a makeshift quiver for his arrows and a few small bags for any useful supplies and medicinals he might pick up along the way. Scrounging through the rest of the house, he found a few pieces of linen he thought might come handy along with a few candles, and placed them all neatly into his bags. Having lost half the day already, Therin figured he was as ready as he would like to be, so he gathered all his supplies and began heading north towards the strange lands he had not been to in such a long time, that is, except for in his dreams. Whether it was the twin swords or the dragons from his dream drew him so. Therin needed answers, and answers he would get, for good or for bad, and with a brave smile and a whole lot of luck, maybe he would be able to catch some food to quell his rebelling stomach. 3 long hours had he walked with not a single living thing to prove his passing. However, luck had not forsaken him entirely, for he had found a small patch of snowberries and a small number of mushrooms. Yet he knew well that these small balms would not stave of his hunger for long. Stomach groaning as he finally reached the forest, Therin stopped and took a moment as the memories flooded back. But his will was like iron, and his stomach was not so easily dissuaded, so he continued slipping in between trees, eyes ever vigilant and on guard, as he was never sure what he had witnessed all those years ago. Spotting a lone deer far in the distance, Therin instantly froze in horror, as it looked exactly like the one he and his father had followed all those years ago. Yet even that fact alone was not enough to inspire such a reaction from his body, and then suddenly it dawned on him. This was the exact same location as when he was a boy. Heart-racing, Therin almost turned to leave, but the growls from his stomach held him still. Doing all he could to pull an arrow from the quiver, Therin prepared his shot, but as he began to control his breath, the deer suddenly grew skittish. Instincts taking hold, he held his arrow back, and seconds later the deer dashed off, darting further into the forest. Finding a faint smile growing, Therin realized he had grown a lot from back then, and at the very least he hadn't made the same mistake as his younger self. Allowing himself only a few moments to reminisce, Therin quickly found the tracks and moved off in pursuit. For a good hour, the deer ran with Therin in constant chase, but eventually the animal tired, stopping in a weary yet false sense of security. Surveying the area for danger, the deer made its gravest mistake yet, as it bowed its head to drink from the stream. Therin knew he was still quite a distance back, but he doubted he would be able to get any closer without startling the already cautious animal, so he drew the bow back and again took aim. With a low whistle, the arrow loosened and leaped into the air with great speed. Watching with anticipation as the arrow sliced through the wind, Therin suddenly heard an abrupt yet all-encompassing bell roaring all around him. Dropping to the ground with his hands over his ears, the ringing suddenly stopped. Shaking his head, Therin regained himself as he let his hand fall away, but to his surprise he found blood. Wiping it on the linen in his bag, he stood back up and tried to clean himself off as best as he could. But before he could finish, a second intense but different high-pitched roar echoed through the trees. Shaken by the sound, both Therin and the deer fell back in pure instinct. With a surprisingly loud thump, the arrow punched deep into the trunk of a tree, barely a hand's length from the deer's head. Though distracted, Therin could hardly stop a sly smile streaking across his face. "Surely you must be protected by the gods, my friend," he said, watching the animal dart back into the thick cover provided by the dense forest. Debating whether to follow, Therin found it hard to put the raw and strange sound from his mind, though admittedly he could hardly recall an animal that could produce such a sound. Yet in fact this only made his curiosity burn even brighter. Playing the noise over in his mind, Therin felt sure that it was a cry of pain, not aggression. So with curiosity at heart and having thrown caution to the wind, Therin moved over and retrieved the wayward arrow. Eyeing the tip and then shaft for damage, he quickly placed it back in his quiver and moved northeast. For quite some time he walked, stopping only to regain his bearings and to search for clues to the mysterious sound. Therin felt a sharp and sudden gust swirling from the north. Intrigued yet still unsure, he tried to brace his stance, yet in a clumsy mass he fell hand first to the snow-sheathed forest floor. Pulling himself to his knees, Therin brushed off the snow that had clung to his coat and quickly looked to the heavens as he stood. To his shock, the sun had already fallen low in the heavens and found itself replaced by a thick cover of clouds that were begging to weep, sending a light yet sustained cover of rain that was soon accompanied by hail over the Amberwoods. Therin quickly moved to a large tree for shelter, knowing he would soon need to turn back. Irked, he fell against the tree, frustrated that he had neither found the source of those strange sounds, nor any sign of his father. Yet he wondered if that was not for the best, for if he had, It might bring him closer to the things that haunted his memories.
Chapter 7. Weary Illarna led her maidens through the winding roads that cut jaggedly through the agricultural heartlands of her beautiful country. At first it seemed like an out-of-season frost, but by the third day she knew something was not right, as the frigid winds that had accompanied them from the capital had now gone altogether, leaving behind a stale yet ever-growing heat that lingered in the air, and well into the night, cattle huddled around what shade or water they could find, while wild animals could not be found at all outside the small parcels of woodlands that remained. Feeling a welcome breeze on her face, Illarna looked up and wiped the sweat from her brow. By the light, she thought, as her eyes fell on the dark pillars of smoke billowing high in the sky and filling the horizon. "Wildfire," she shouted, thrusting her hand in the air to stop the maidens behind her.
What are your orders?
Sylvain said, stopping beside her. Considering her options, Illarna looked back for a moment, looking over the state of her maidens. "I'm unsure. We are already exhausted from the heat."
This is true, though I'm guessing there is more to it.
"Well, if I'm right, there should be a town about half an hour down this road. Now, thanks to that change in the wind we just had, it will be right in the path of the wildfire."
Well, I suppose there is only one thing to do.
Illarna smiled, knowing what she was about to do would be risky. "Let's go." Raising her open hand back in the air, Illarna signalled the maidens to push forward at full speed. Arriving at the main entrance to Rennum, Illarna knew that time was of the essence, that she would need to be quick in assessing the situation. The fire was already closer than she would have liked. Its dark columns of smoke billowed and boiled far overhead in a frightening display that heralded what was to come. More dangerous still, she had already seen the smaller sprout fires beginning to jump far ahead of the main fire, of which some had already come down in the village itself. Surprised by the lack of coordinated effort in the village, Illarna jumped from her horse and moved to the closest villager, yet she was merely waved off as she began to ask about the village leader. Frustrated, she returned to her maidens and signalled them to action, leaving only a handful to watch over the horses and supplies. Satisfied with the swift response, Illarna quickly turned back to the threat at hand and moved forth deeper into the village. Many of the villagers were surprised to see the royal red cloak at first, but few stayed long enough to find out why they had come. Before long, the entire village had succumbed to the chaotic behaviour of people scurrying about in every direction, with little to no organisation. The streets had become so disorderly that everyone was tripping over one another, when suddenly the mood shifted for the worst as the fear had grown so fraught that everyone began to grab anything they could and flee. Knowing all too well the inherent danger of the chaos, Illarna moved to take swift command of the situation, realising the villagers had no idea nor any plan to defend their homes. Despite her calls to be taken to the town leaders, the confusion only grew, but it soon became clear that there was no leadership left to direct her fury, that was aside from a few ill-equipped guards who were trying to get the village back under some semblance of control. Looking at all the people, Illarna gauged the estimated size of the village to be around 1,000 souls, and realised she had walked into a problem far larger than she could possibly have known. Defiant, she pushed her way to the centre of town in a further search of any semblance of leadership. But to her horror, she instead found an elderly man leaning against a bent pillar of wood, sputtering about in a strained effort to get his breath back. "Here, have a drink," Illarna said, passing over a water skin to dampen the man's throat. "May I ask what is your name, kind sir?"
Edmund de Verley.
He answered, still rasping for air. "Do you know where the village head is?"
The arsehat took off with his wealth and left us all to perish.
The old man said, shaking his head in incredulity. Illarna refrained from questioning him any further, noticing the strain in old Edmund's voice. Besides, any questions could be answered later. Now she must focus on more pressing matters. Turning to her maidens, Illarna had finally decided how she would deal with this wayward village. "Right, Valatin, Allard, Astia, you will take your units and gather as many villagers as you are able." Taking a pause for a moment, Illarna turned her full attention to the first of the officers mentioned. "Valatin, you and your charge will be responsible for clearing the village streets, so the fire can't find leverage when it tries to spread from block to block." With a stout salute, Annika Valatin moved off with her charges, wasting no time in gathering the attention of the villagers, of whom far too many were women and children. Yet Illarna realised that in desperate times, drastic actions are required. Having called their attention, Annika took a moment for the villagers to gather. Relieved at the number present, Annika grew thankful, for she knew Illarna was taking a gamble. as there was no guarantee that the villagers were going to take kindly to strangers coming in and taking command. But this, however, was a positive sign, and so in an effort to not waste the momentum, Annika continued and led her section away. Feeling the winds of change blowing through her hair, Illarna smiled as a crowd began forming around the maidens. Seizing the momentum, Illarna moved to the second and third officers with orders. Allard, Astia, I need you to take your units and rally as many able-bodied volunteers as possible and start clearing the wheat fields from the northwestern side of Rennum. You will need to cut a strip along the edge of town, at least 10 meters wide. It will serve as a makeshift fire break. Clear to their orders, the maidens bowed and immediately moved to effect. Officer Alia Allard and her charge went straight to the fields to the west to start cutting down crops, while Nadira Astia joined her charge in spreading out across the village, gathering as many able bodies as possible.
My wife.
Edmund voiced, seizing the rare moment of silence, concern carrying on his voice. Illarna turned to him sympathetically. Sylvain will take you and your wife to the village's centre. You should be safe there for now at least. Illarna turned to Sylvain. Can you take a few maidens and set up a medical post? I doubt we will get out of this unscathed, but please keep it mobile. Who knows when we may be forced to fall back. In full agreement, Sylvain took Edmund's arm, pulled it over her shoulder, and slowly got him to stand.
Where will you be, La?
She asked before taking her leave. Illarna smiled, pointing to the east, helping the others cut crops. My dear Edmund, Lucille exclaimed, rushing over with a chair in hand. Sitting Edmund down on the chair, Sylvain looked up at Lucille.
Ma'am, my name is Sylvain Duval. I am a maiden of the Phoenix. I'm here by the will of our leader, the Lady Illarna Valenkor, daughter of Lord Ilandros of the House of Valenkor and the High Lord of Valentir.
Yes, we have heard many stories of the maidens and their battles, Miss Duval. It is nice to finally meet one of your order in person. I thank you for returning my husband home, though I fear there will not be much of a home once the fire reaches us. Sylvain tried to hold back a smile, but the old lady's own smile proved too contagious.
We found your husband leaning against a wall not far from here, quite exhausted. Do you know what he was doing out there by himself?
The old fool had it in his mind to save our home, and so set out to start clearing the streets in preparation. I tried to dissuade him, but he would not have a bar of it. I honestly feared he would not return, particularly with the village in a state of panic. Lucille looked to Edmund, but he just waved away the notion. He tried to get people to help him defend the village, but people from small places like our Rennum are easily frightened, you know. But that wouldn't stop my stubborn husband from trying now, would it? Lucille smiled proudly, yet with a hint of sadness.
Your husband will no longer be fighting by himself, ma'am. Lady Illarna and the maidens are helping as we speak.
On that note, Sylvain moved on to a more pressing matter.
I need to get you both to a safer location. I will be setting up a medical post in the village's centre, so please gather any provisions you may need so we can head off.
Annika made her way west along the chaotic streets of Rennum. However, the further she travelled, the more barren the streets became, until she finally reached a crossroads on the far western side. Noticing an adequately large open space, Annika unrolled a sheepskin map of the village, a map that was apparently borrowed from the Lord's villa by a particularly angry young man. Placing it on the wooden barrel, she studied it intently, searching for the most suitable locations to set up all the supply posts they would need to fight the fire. She knew it would be no easy matter, seeing as the location would need ready access to water from a well or aqueduct, while still being close enough to the fire. Pulling a knife from her belt and pointing to a spot on the map, Annika started to give out orders to the maidens, the first being the division of force into 3 groups, under the command of the most senior maidens in each. Moving the dagger along the 3 main roads running north to south, Annika started explaining her plan. Here, here, and here. We will create 3 lines of defence along these main roads. They will be our fire breaks. It looks as if we are lucky enough to have quite a few wells, and even an aqueduct along the second line, but the first will be a hard fight, for there are only a handful of wells, so we will need to split between them and use the water wisely. Please remember the aim is to not put out the fire, but to stop them from jumping the line and spreading. Annika noticed some of the locals were not understanding what she was saying, so she tried to explain it in a different way in the hopes that it would make more sense. When the fires begin to spring up ahead of the main front, do not try to fight the main blaze.
concentrate your efforts on the smaller fires in an attempt to stop it from jumping across the streets. You can try to save what you can, though it's not worth your lives. Please remember that homes can be rebuilt and possessions can be reacquired, but you only have but one life, so I advise you do not waste it. Annika reaffirmed, making sure the villagers understood. Shifting her attention back to the maidens, she continued, Ald'rune, you will oversee the front lines. You and your charge will be responsible for gathering as many blankets and buckets as possible. You are to set them up at each well along the road. Wasting no time, Annika turned her attention to the next maiden. Montgomery, you will oversee the second line of defense. Until then, you and your charge will be responsible for clearing the roads so there is nothing the fire can use to spread. Most of the stuff here will burn, even if the fire were to just look at it. So all the wood and other materials lying around need to be moved immediately. Once you are done, take your post and prepare the second line for immediate action. If the first line is breached, the fire will spread quickly, and the first will be forced to fall back to the third and final line to recover. Annika again moved her attention, this time to the last senior maiden. Morel, you will be overseeing the final line, which I am afraid will also be our last, for it is in the heart of the village and where the medical post will also be. If the fire breaks through there, we will not have the resources to fight it any longer in any meaningful form. Sylvain will also be at the final line, so use her overall understanding of the field to your advantage. Making sure she understands, Annika pushed her dagger into the part of the map where a thick road separates the two halves of the village. Sylvain will be here and you will be on the other side of the road right here. Do not let the fire spread past this point, though in the event that it does, evacuate the wounded immediately. Rolling up the map of the village, Annika placed her hands behind her back, giving one last speech for everyone to hear. If the fire breaches the last line of defense, Sylvain will order the retreat, for the defense would have failed. Nevertheless, hold firm, for with hope we will fight for your homes until the last minute. Looking like a pillar carved of stone, Annika looked over the crowd gathered. Listen to the maidens. They will instruct you when to fight a fire and when to leave it alone to burn, and most importantly, when it is time to move. If there is anything you are unsure of, do not hesitate to clarify with your nearest maiden. Like the very kindle that surrounded them, the peasants' hope rekindled like a beacon and began to cheer. Feeling the full weight of their hopes, Annika turned to the maidens once again, offering a final word of thought. Each one of us must give this fight our all, for only then can we expect the same to be given by these folk. Now pick out 7, get to your allocated spot and defend it until it is lost, then move back to the next rally point. In that fateful moment, the momentum within the village of Rennum had changed. The peasantry and maidens alike moved with single purpose below the emblem of the phoenix blazing defiantly, its splendor daring the impossible.
Chapter 8. Feeling a slight warmth on his cheek, Therin stopped and looked to the canopy above, and to his surprise Sol had pierced the heavens. Yet it was only for a moment, for the chilling wind soon returned, and the sun's rejuvenating light would be forced back behind the churning clouds far sooner than he would have liked. Winds calming and snow fading, Therin wondered if his luck might have turned, and soon found himself hopeful that he may have avoided what was starting to look more and more like a blizzard. Yet in the end, it did not make for much difference, for his journey had already ground to what felt like a painfully slow crawl, for he was stifled by the ever-thickening undergrowth, and more significantly, a thick covering of snow that hid its complexity behind the chaos of every step, making everyone taken hampered by the care and thought it would need to take the next. Although having to move at such a slow pace allowed him to collect the few, yet powerful medicinal plants that only bloomed in the snow, of which some performed particularly good at taking the edge off of head pains, like those left over from an especially nasty sleep, much like the one he had experienced the previous night. Yet he thought it's not so bad, for on the brighter side, it had allowed him to take in the entire breadth of the indescribable surroundings he now found himself in. Distracted as he pressed down into his next footstep, Therin suddenly felt the ground give way beneath him and he fell. Thrashing about as he descended, Therin stuck his hands out wide in hopes to balance himself, and thankfully with a little effort he again found his footing. Taking a breath, he looked around and noticed something quite strange as just past the slight crest in front of him, and behind a partially hidden dense section of the forest were the trunks of several trees completely turned over. Moving to the largest of the group, Therin brushed away the thick layer of snow, revealing that the trees had not simply fallen in the storm, for upon its hefty trunk he noted several large gashes torn deep into the heart of this particularly hard species of ironwood tree. Unable to see how the damage could have been caused by an axe, or in fact any tool he could imagine, Therin quickly deduced that maybe they were toppled by the creature from earlier. Following them like a trail, Therin carefully inspected each tree and recognized the same sort of damage on every one of them. Yet there was something that vexed him. Some of the trees had sustained damage in all sorts of unusual places and degrees. Some of them were cleaved completely in two, while others sustained damage at unusual angles and height, but some seemed to have been completely shattered as if by blunt force alone. Perplexed and a little scared, Therin continued further, but doubt slowly but surely creeped in as the damage on the trees grew ever more destructive the further he came. Suddenly questioning his own sanity and reason for wanting to find whatever caused all this damage, Therin noticed the light of dusk shining brightly over a clearing a few meters east. Heart pounding, he stepped timidly through the undergrowth as he continued south, until finally he reached a slight rise in the forest's floor, but still he could not see into the clearing as well as he would like. Trying to get a better vantage point over the area, Therin shifted his weight and lowered his body into a crouch as he moved toward what he thought was a stable outcropping. Looking over the clearing, Therin could only make out what appeared to be more fallen trees and shrubs buried by a particularly thick covering of snow. Leaning over the edge, he wondered if he should take a closer look, yet as he moved to pull himself back, the rocky foundation beneath him gave way and he immediately fell. Tumbling, turning, and making a whole lot of noise, Therin finally came to a rest behind a half-turned tree, right on the edge of the clearing. Lifting his hand to his head, he brushed the snow from his face, but just as he did, he noticed a large portion of the snow slowly rising and falling, like a massive blanket. Therin gasped as the snow beneath his foot suddenly shifted, and a clear snap from a broken branch reverberated across the now eerily quiet clearing. Calculating the clearing's size in his mind, Therin couldn't believe what he was looking at, for the mound of snow would have to be at least 10 meters across. Rising for a third time, a portion of the snow fell away, revealing 3 massive feathers protruding from the snowy cover, each at least half the size of a man. Over the far side of the clearing, a large clump of snow dislodged from a tall tree and fell to the ground with a thump. Ducking further as all his senses redoubled, there focusing on the clearing, Therin waited, thinking there was no way whatsoever that the thing who might be hiding or maybe sleeping under the snow would ignore these 3 very distinct sounds that alone might be passed off as happenstance. But together, even he would be very suspicious something must be about. Chest pounding from a potent mix of fear and curiosity, Therin looked on in wonder as the snow methodically shifted about in a strange circular motion without a care in the world, almost like a cat trying to get comfortable again after being rudely pulled from its slumber. Suddenly a wing broke free of its snowbound prison in a misty white haze, yet it was immediately obvious that it was no simple wing nor creature as a whole, for it was far larger than anything he had seen before. Suddenly, another part of the snow to the far side rose up, although barely visible at first, a feathery tail, not unlike that of a cat streaked free from the snow, and begun to sway with a blistering lethality, although as he observed a little longer, a distinct irritation seemed to emerge from its motion. Therin watched in complete bewilderment as the tail flicked and swayed to and fro, but soon a further section of snow began to bulge, but this time it was barely 10 meters away. Eyes wide at the enormous head of an eagle softly emerging from the veil, Therin eyed a small clump of snow hanging stubbornly to the eagle's head. With a swift yet simple motion, the enormous creature quickly shook itself free from any embarrassment, and as the snow settled, its silver-gold head began to reflect brilliantly in the golden light of dusk. With its ears curved and exuding a cat-like poise, the creature looked around at its surroundings before eerily settling on the overturned tree that Therin now found himself hiding behind. Softening its posture, the creature turned back, lifting itself up in a single motion as it moved around the hole its body had just left. Snow still falling from its thick shifting coat, Therin looked on unable to believe his eyes were witnessing the full glory and majesty of its mythical form. With great presence, the creature's imposing wings suddenly reached out and up to the heavens. Its long feline-like body of feathers and fur stretched out in an arching motion as they stood on end. All the while its tail continued to sway about in what seemed a methodical, yet somehow brazen manner. Completely bewildered, Therin watched, unable to look away, but to his surprise the creature suddenly staggered as it tried to turn in the opposite direction. Its grace failing, the creature fell back to the ground, releasing a high-pitched wail. Clawing at its hind leg, Therin finally noticed a black metallic chain wrapped around its massive limb. At its end lied several massive weights the size of a decent anvil. Appalled, Therin's engineering mind pondered on the thought as to what kind of contraption could throw something so preposterous into the air, let alone have it travel any significant distance to bring down a creature of such size. Pulled from the thought by the sounds of metal chains clashing once again, Therin watched as the creature wrestled with its bonds. Feeling an intense sadness, Therin couldn't help but look for a way to help the creature, but no matter how hard he thought on the matter, he couldn't figure a way to approach. How could he ever know if it was in its nature to harm him? And by the size of the creature's claws, there was a very real chance that it could be an aggressive species. Frozen by the sound of branches cracking behind him, Therin ducked back down as he swiftly turned to see what it was. To his horror, his eyes fell on the antlers of the buck from earlier. Resisting the urge to shrink back to the safety of the tree, Therin attempted to remain still and watched, waiting for any signs the animal might charge. Mind racing, he kept trying to think of a way out. Usually he would try to back away slowly and put as much space between them as possible, but he was stuck between a full-size buck and a creature he knew very little about. Suddenly the buck began to lower its head, effectively taking the choice out of his hands. Therin attempted to dart sideways, yet his footing was less than desirable, and he slipped over the damp ground and fell tumbling. Regaining his feet, he tried to disguise his presence, but a high-pitched roar proved it all too late. Arms open, Therin slowly turned and looked to the creature who was already staring at him with its deep, piercing eyes. Hearing the panicked trampling of hooves scurrying away, Therin's heart threatened to pound out of his chest. Hearing the commotion, the creature's head turned a little and looked past him, catching only a faint blur of a stag's tail as it darted off into the forest. With the disruption gone from sight, the creature turned its full focus back to Therin, its interest renewed. Seeing nowhere to go, Therin held hope that if he helped this creature in its moment of need, it would let him leave with his life. Mustering all the courage he could, Therin stretched out the fingers in his right hand and pointed to the metal chain wrapped around the creature's leg, hoping this was symbolic enough to show his intentions. The creature slowly followed his hand to its hind leg, but darted back soon after replying with what can only be described as a chirp. Unsure as to how to proceed, Therin waited and tried to observe, hoping time would give him an out. But after a long few minutes, the creature let out a loud sudden roar that forced Therin back. Composing himself again the best that he could, Therin stepped forward in as diplomatical fashion as possible. Yet with every step taken, he wondered if it might be his last, but one after the other he moved closer, and eventually he stood within reaching distance. To his great relief, the creature did not move nor make any sign of aggression. It simply watched, darting back and forth between Therin and its hind leg. Anxious, he slowly placed his left hand on the chain, but just as he did, a crippling chill rushed up his arm. Wrenching it back, Therin looked for any signs of injury, but to his relief it appeared to be okay. Therin wondered for a moment, curious as to what it could have been, but the gravity of the situation quickly made him realize it most likely didn't matter near as much as the giant feline bird now staring at him. Again he reached for the chain, except this time he used both hands and pulled upon them in such a way that the knot loosened slightly. Therin persisted for a time, but no matter how hard he tried, it would not loosen completely, and to make things that little more infuriating, the moment he let go of the chain it would again tighten. Refusing to give up, he looked to the creature apologetically for what he was about to do, and turned to retrieve the strip of leather from his bag. Pulling the chain away from the creature's skin a second time, Therin wrapped the leather around its leg to create a sort of barrier between the chain and the creature's skin. Realizing he was breathing heavily, he stopped a moment and looked around for a suitable branch. Finding just the right one, he pulled it from the ground and ran his hand along its length to remove any protruding branch that might get in the way. Raising a brow, he turned to the creature again, hoping to give it at least some warning as to what he was about to do. Waiting but a moment, he then placed it between the leather and the chain to create some space. Doing the same 3 more times at different places along the leg, Therin began sliding the chain from the foot, but as he continued, an array of large jagged hooks sprung from within the links themselves, in what he could only assume was an attempt to prevent any effort of removing the chain by force. Thankfully they found no worthwhile anchor, as the branches did a passing job of keeping the spikes away from the skin. Trying to get a closer look at the mechanism, Therin suddenly pulled away, as one of the barbs began to extend, further digging into both the leather and the branches with alarming ease. Feeling a sudden pain from his right hand, Therin looked down at his palm now dripping with blood. Clenching his fist, he moved to rip off a stretch of fabric, when suddenly he heard a strange sound coming from where he just was. Looking back to the chain, he realized that the section that had cut him had begun to shake furiously. Watching keenly, Therin looked on in amazement as it began to shift, as it bubbled and boiled unlike anything he had ever seen. For a long minute, Therin could do little more than stare, frozen in time, unable to process what he was witnessing, for it had been a day full of the impossible. Suddenly a streak of fear for the creature's well-being dawned on him, but to his surprise it too was watching, bewildered at the sight, yet there was no fear in its eyes. Above, a light snow had begun to fall, its white starry flakes quickly dissolving into the crimson of his blood. Before long the shaking in the chain stopped, and without warning, it suddenly fell to the ground, shattering as if it were but ice. Reaching down, Therin picked up one of the larger chunks of what he thought was metal, but it was no longer the cold, sturdy material it once appeared to be. Closing his fist, the chunk broke apart and fell through his fingers like chalk. Brushing the last of its remains from his hand, Therin looked back to the creature as it attempted to pull itself to its feet, yet as it tried, its back leg could hardly bear the weight. Recognizing the pain, Therin turned and walked over to a large pine tree at the edge of the clearing. In smooth motions, he slid his hand over the trunk, searching for sap. Finding just the spot, he pulled the dagger from his belt and carefully pushed it into the trunk of the tree. Allowing a moment for the sap to flow, Therin collected a sizable portion of its golden liquid and then returned to the waiting creature who bore a clearly curious look on its face. Wiping the sap on a section of leather, Therin pulled a few medicinal plants out of his bag and sprinkled a good amount over the top before combining them together. Looking at the creature's back leg again, Therin knew he would have to clean the wound somehow, yet he also knew that it would most definitely hurt. So he turned to the creature in an effort to convey at least some warning. Yet as he did, Therin realized it was already looking at him, and had probably been watching him this whole time. The majestic creature simply looked down to Therin's hand, and then back to his face. Following its gaze, Therin realized the cut on his hand was still bleeding. Realizing that he could use this to convey the message, he pulled a piece of linen out of his bag and ripped away a strip. He then grabbed his water skin and rinsed the wound thoroughly, before applying a small portion of the sap to the bandage. Biting on a stray branch, Therin tightly wrapped it around his hand and then tied it off. Allowing the pain to show visibly in his expression, he again looked back up to the creature, pointing first to his hand, then to the creature's leg. Showing no intention one way or the other, the creature merely turned its head slightly and sat back down, but after a moment, it suddenly shook its head and looked back as it slowly began to extend its hind leg. Hoping that was the sign of agreement he was looking for, Therin grabbed his water skin and began rinsing the creature's large array of wounds as best he could. Letting out a faint sigh as he used the last bit of water he had, Therin came to the last wound and cleaned it thoroughly. Happy with the result, he quickly wrapped the medicinal concoction over the creature's leg and stepped back. Cautious, he looked the creature over for a time, for he was unsure as to how it would react once the ointment began its work. For he knew well the effect, and just as he expected, the creature's eyes suddenly widened, and it began to shake its head wildly. Giving his best empathetic smile, Therin waited for the creature's pain to abate, before returning to the injury, rubbing what remained of the sap over the creature's leg, and then wrapping it with all the linen he had left. Exhausted, Therin fell back a short distance and dropped to the ground, resting his weary legs. Still unable to believe the reality of his eyes, Therin could only watch as the creature began preening its feathers. Yet it was not long before a sudden jolt of the creature's head made him realize he was still in the middle of a forest. Searching for what it was that drew the creature so, Therin realized he could hear a low rhythmic sound approaching from the west. Although soft at first, the sound steadily grew until finally it shut out all other distractions. Leaning forward, Therin could barely believe that not one, but two of these majestic creatures could be out here in the forest. Heart again pounding as he watched, Therin caught the very tip of a wing flashing past the edge of the clearing, its speed defying imagination. Ears perked, the creature sitting in the middle of the clearing suddenly pulled itself from the ground, noticeably nimbler than before. Tail flicking, it quickly moved to make space, and to Therin's surprise it moved closer, stopping only a few feet from where he sat. The second mighty creature glided over again, but this time it lifted the snow into a fog that made it impossible to see anything beyond that which was directly in front of him. Mouth ajar, Therin could not believe the sheer force and size of the creature's wings as they moved in flight. Unexpectedly, the first creature reared its own mighty wings and blew the cloud of snow away in a single yet forceful motion. Moments later, the second creature returned and gracefully glided in, landing with a short trot as it came to a rounding stop. Circling on the spot in a clear show of intimidation, Therin found himself shrinking closer to the injured creature beside him. Coming to a standstill, the second creature puffed up its elegant silver wings and glared at Therin with this species' signature piercing eyes. Therin found himself beginning to step back in hope to defuse the situation, but the creature matched every move. Suddenly it stamped its mighty front paw into the ground in a clearly challenging manner, its giant claws tearing into the snow and dirt with alarming ease. Suddenly, the first creature roared and rushed forward, nipping the newcomer right on the backside, in what Therin could only assume was some form of authority shown for his benefit. The newcomer immediately lowered itself to the ground, ears dropping as it let out a dramatically long, laboured rush of air. Staring in pure disbelief, Therin could hardly believe what he had just witnessed, yet reality rarely waits for our disbelief to abate, and neither do these creatures, as the injured of the two quickly returned to him and presented its injured limb, insisting he should apply more of the balming agent. Applying the last of the healing salve and tightening the linen bandage, Therin stepped back and watched the two creatures, both of whom had already forgotten the previous scuffle and had now grown quite content as they chirped to one another. Eventually, the sun's very last sliver of light fell behind the horizon, and he knew he would have to leave soon, although he couldn't help but feel the time had come all too soon. For a time, he had even considered camping the night, but something deep inside nagged at him, insisting that making camp in the forest would be a terrible decision. Suddenly thinking of his mother, Therin's stomach began to growl, so he retrieved the sack of snowberries from his pack and pulled a few out. Suddenly, the sensation of eyes falling upon him sent a shiver running down his back. Growing uncomfortable, Therin slowly looked up from his meal and almost fell backwards. In the fading light, two sets of eyes suddenly blinked, and Therin realized that both the creatures were now staring directly at the tiny berries in his hand. Struggling to contain his laughter, he found a sturdy piece of bark and emptied the sack of berries onto it, saving just a few for himself. Waiting only for Therin to get out of the way, the once graceful feline eagle swiftly descended on the unsuspecting berries and devoured them in the blink of an eye. Still smiling, he raised his right hand and brushed the side of the creature's face. A deep purr quietly began to rumble from the creature, despite its injuries, and all the while the second nudged at his side, presumably wanting the same treatment. Lifting his other hand, he began to pat them both. Feeling a sudden pain, he realized his wound had opened again. Adjusting the bandage in an effort to stop the bleeding, Therin realized he had accidentally gotten some of his blood on both of the creatures, and to his surprise, the second creature had already begun to lick the blood from the side of its face. Eyes fully dilated, it suddenly stopped and slowly turned, until it finally settled its still gaze upon him. Not understanding what had just happened, Therin figured now was as good a time as any to leave, and began to gather his things. Constantly looking from one creature to the other, Therin suddenly felt very small, seeing as both their eyes were now staring directly at him. Yes, this would be the most ideal time to take my leave, he whispered to himself. Having gathered all he cared for, Therin started to move slowly towards his resting bow. With every step he felt more certain that he could feel the weight of their gaze growing as he moved further away. Sliding it over his shoulder, Therin raised his hand timidly to his heart. "Thank you." As his lips fell still, a sudden ringing of bells sounded in his ears, yet it was so soft, he thought it surprising he even noticed it, for the wind too was beginning to howl. Moving away, Therin realized he had probably been smiling the entire time, so turned and raised his hand to wave one last time. "I am honoured you allowed me to share this time with you." Heart pounding and stomach turning giddy from adrenaline and hunger, Therin turned, still sure he could feel their gaze upon his back as he disappeared into the forest, and just like they had begun, the bells fell silent.
Chapter 9. Feeling the full force of the midday sun glaring down at her, Illarna strained as she pulled back her sword. Secure in the grip, she released all the energy stored in her muscles and pulled it around with all her strength. The sword sung as it cut cleanly through the air, its keen edge delving deep into the thicket. Leaning back for a much-needed breather, Illarna found herself looking down at the sweat streaming down her arms. Letting out a breath of exhaustion, she turned to the sun now set high in the sky, yet the very effort proved arduous. Casting the sweat from her brow, she looked down to her one constant companion from these past 12 years, its heart shining bright in the harsh light. Pulling a cloth from her side, she began rubbing away the sticky residue left from her work, when suddenly a flare of orange flashed across its surface. Spurred to action, she searched for any signs of flame in the encroaching smoke. Suddenly a single tall blade of fire flared, reaching out over the horizon. Startled, Illarna allowed herself only a single moment, knowing personally the danger she would be in if the wind were to suddenly change. Immediately after the nascent thought formed, a stray gust rushed past her cheek, and Illarna could feel her heart skip a beat as the sounds of cracking in the distance filled her mind. Suddenly a fireball leaped out ahead of the main fire. Watching intently, Illarna could do nothing as the fireball burst into flames in a large section of grasslands not too far to the west. Hearing footsteps, Illarna waited impatiently as one of the maidens approached with meaningful haste. "My lady, the fire break is nearing completion, but there is more yet left unfinished. There is still at least 100 meters on the north side that needs to be cut before the fire arrives." Showing signs of physical strain, Illarna wiped the blade of her sword one last time and slid it back into its sheath. "How long do you expect it to take, Aaliyah?" "Another 20 minutes at least, my lady." Reassured, Illarna nodded and quickly gave orders for the southern half of her force to assist Aaliyah in completing her mission. Looking around at her own section now all but complete, Illarna corralled the remaining maidens and ordered them back into the city. Returning to her station with swelled numbers at her back, Aaliyah immediately acted upon the orders given. One by one, the maidens moved off into the fields and began clearing the growth. Filled with pride by the sight, Aaliyah could not imagine herself ever serving in any other unit nor craft or occupation, and the feeling escaped her lips, if only upon a whisper. "Maidens, I cannot express how honoured I am. I doubt there is anything that could break your spirit." Arriving back at the western entrance of the village, Illarna's demeanour instantly changed as she could see the amount of work that still needed to be done. But more than this, she feared the fact that everyone else could see the same. Looking around, she knew that most of the peasants were moving far too slowly for the task mounted against them. However, she could not feel any anger towards them, for she felt the same aches and pains while being far younger than most. Wavering, she could do little more than stand there as she felt the last of her stamina beginning to flee her bones. "Unacceptable," she murmured as she forced her will into adamantium wall against the doubt, for she knew that only a great work would see them all through this day. Hiding all signs of her own fatigue, Illarna moved along the line and instructed all who stood immobile to fall back to the second line of defence and prepare, for if they failed on the first, the fire would have but one way to spread. Her body going through the motions of carting piles of wood and rubble from one side of the road to the other, Illarna could not help but let her mind wander through the intrusive thoughts that lingered, even now. First, she thought of her mission and its mandate to stop the prophecy of the Tal'dorin from coming to pass. A quest that Illarna had always held close to heart, considering it her birthright, for she had been told it was so since the first days of the training as a maiden. However, the thought that vexed her was not that of her father's mandate, but rather the recurring dreams that had been plaguing her mind every night this past week. No matter how hard she tried to think on the matter, she would always find the same answer, that there wasn't one, let alone any understanding, as to why she had the dreams in the first place. Maybe Duval is right, Illarna thought to herself. Perhaps the dream was meant to be a warning about this fire. But why? Was all this predetermined? Was me riding to the aid of this village always going to happen? Who is that man? And why does his eyes haunt me so? Or maybe it means something completely different. I don't know, by the light, what am I supposed to do? Trying to wrap her head around all the potential meanings of the dream, Illarna missed the subtle change in the direction of the wind, but the smell of ash quickly pulled her back to reality. Realising she had missed this crucial change, Illarna looked to the direction of the fire, which was now due west. Instantly she realised that the fire had already changed direction, and what that would mean for the people of Rennum. Taking one last moment to look over the maidens and villagers moving about their work, Illarna quietly considered how much was yet unfinished. But it was just as she feared. There was far more work than hands available to complete it, and for a lone solitary moment she questioned whether it was wise to get everyone to fall back to the second line, or was it wiser still to do nothing and keep them where they were? Yet always the cruel mistress time would prove itself, as before Illarna could even make her decision, let alone put it to action, an endless churning wave of smoke rolled over the outskirts of the village, making it impossible to see more than 3 meters ahead. Training kicking in, Illarna yelled at the top of her voice. "Maidens, sound the retreat and fall back. Let no one be left behind." Hearing the deafening screams of countless voices calling for help, Illarna knew she needed to do something to calm them. "Everyone keep your cool and stay together. Hold out your hands and grab a hold of those closest to you. Stay close and follow the sound of my voice." With the sound of coughing coming from every direction, Illarna moved east to the second line. Hearing drums sounding from the north, Illarna smiled a little, knowing that Aaliyah and Nadira had finished cutting the firebreak and were now on their way to reinforce the second line. "By the Tal, thank you, Allard and Estir, you may have just saved us." My lady. Aaliyah and Nadira spoke in unison as they fell in beside Illarna. "It seems you finished just in time for fate to test our resolve, ladies. It seems the fire will reach us within the next few minutes. It would appear that the fire was either much closer than I anticipated, or the wind has a mind of its own and it really has it out for us. Either way, once we reach the second line, make sure everyone dampens their faces to stop them from getting heat stroke. Also, make sure they wash away any soot that builds up on the face. You don't want to be getting any more of that in our bodies than we must." Reaching the second line, Illarna could see that many were already suffering from the side effects of smoke inhalation. Some complained about their eyes burning, while others struggled with shortness of breath. But besides these very physical constraints already presenting in the ill, Illarna could see clearly that almost everyone present had already begun to show the very real signs of shock. "Aaliyah, one more thing. I will also need some maidens to take the injured to the triage as soon as you are able." "Yes, my lady," Aaliyah said, instantly falling to her duty. Final preparations made, Illarna forced a defiant look upon her face, knowing all eyes were now looking upon her, and to the slightest signs of fear could spell doom upon the entire operation. Yet she would be lying if her heart did not threaten to break, as she looked upon the smoke swirled above. Like the calm before the storm, the line of defense suddenly fell still as the anticipation for the upcoming fight grew all-imposing, holding every last soul within its inescapable grasp. Soon the murmurs and coughs of anxious peasants were the only sounds that could be heard from the line, yet Illarna could hardly fault them, for she too felt the bitter sting of her own nerves failing her. No, there is nothing to be done now but to wait. Feeling a slight flutter in the air, Annika looked up just in time to catch the winds softly change to a slightly southwestward direction. With a slight smile and a little spark of hope seeding within, she allowed a faint hope to flourish that with this little breath of luck, the fire may yet bypass the village.
"Is this a good sign, Miss Fullerton? The winds are starting to move the smoke away from the village,"
asked one of the villagers.
"I must be honest with you, it is a good sign, but it does not necessarily mean we are safe. Fires are very unpredictable and very dependent on the weather conditions, and I fear it impossible to predict whether it's currently in our favour or against us. We are completely at the wind's mercy, and at this point anything could happen, so all there is for us to do is wait and remain vigilant, ever ready to fight the fire wherever it might sprout."
Annika answered, watching as a young man slumped back amongst the others. Quickly, the eerie silence fell back over the village, and even Illarna refused to move from where she stood for fear that the slightest movement would let others in on the chaotic nature of her mind. She knew well that right now it was her sole duty to remain imposingly still and deafeningly silent, a metaphoric bulwark for others to pin their hopes ever searching as she was for any sign that the wind might change again. Time seemed to slow as the fire travelled along the western side of the village, its edge constantly burning against the firebreak the maidens had hastily set. As if by the words of prophecy, the wind suddenly turned on itself, sending great twisting spires of flame high up into the air, forming great towers of fire. One after the other, the fire spires fell and rose again, concentrating their chaotic energies anew. But eventually something must break, and so once again the wind changed, casting the blaze east, right into the village. The brief respite of clean air quickly faded, as hot smoke promptly took its place, rushing back over the village, blanketing it in a thick cover of ash and darkness. Fears now realised, Annika stood incapable of moving to action. Catching a glint of light in the darkness, she turned, and to her surprise, she caught the glint of Illarna's armour as she forced her way through the smoke. Quickly the realisation hit her. Illarna was making her way straight to the head of the defence line.
"Oh, by the Tal,"
Annika sighed in disbelief, looking back to finally see the incoming inferno.
"Why couldn't you have just bypassed this damned village? Must you always move to defy the gods?"
Embarrassed by her lack of action, Annika decided she would not waste another second on that thought, and immediately turned her attention back to her charge.
"Right, we're up everyone. Ready yourselves. Grab a damp cloth and hold it up to your face. Then start filling buckets and line them up along the well so we can pass them down the line. The person at the end of the line will use the bucket to douse the fire wherever it sprouts, and then return with the bucket to the well so it can be filled once again to start the process over. Understood?"
Leaving no room for hesitancy, she moved to action, picking up the first bucket. It did not take long for a wall of jarring heat to grow along the street, as the villagers fought to defend their homes, and a second wave of smoke had already begun to drop over the village, forcing visibility to little more than several metres in any direction. The familiar sounds of coughing and spluttering grew steadily, so Annika reaffirmed her point. "Remember to keep the damp cloth over your faces." Noticing the first fire trying to jump the street, Annika moved forward, throwing a bucket of water on top of it, quenching the flames. But not a moment later, a second spot fire ignited up the road, then another, and before long the entire line was moving buckets forward from person to person in methodical fashion. Annika quickly realised that the front line would soon become a hard, gruelling fight, and at any moment it could get away from them. Yet, as quickly as the thought passed, she began to fear that there was far too few buckets, and even fewer people, to use them effectively in dealing with such a persistent fire. Instantly, she resigned herself to the fact that it was only going to get worse, for she would need to be careful and preserve as much strength for the last line as she could. For at the current rate of advancement, she feared that the majority of her numbers would potentially fall unconscious before the fire even reaches the centre of the village. Now moving by pure instinct, she wondered, if the fire was travelling from the north, then made its way east, wouldn't that make the grasslands towards the north already burnt? Well, mostly at least. Annika mused over that fact for a moment, realising she might just be able to aid the defence more effectively on the ends of the fire. Turning to the nearest maiden, she gave orders for her to take charge and to get word to Illarna that she and 2 other maidens would be heading north in hopes to fight the fire more effectively. With a nod in acknowledgement from the maiden, Annika moved to a sprint. Running through smoke and ash, Annika could feel the fire blazing along the northern line. Yet as she broke from the fire front, she saw the full might of the fire bearing against them and despaired. Yet her training would demand nothing but her full enduring duty to the very end. Making her way further north as quickly as she could, Annika soon realised that the smell of fire had begun to fade. This just might work. It seems that the north side of town might just be the key to beat this fire. I'll have to notify the maidens of this when I get to them. Hopefully we might be able to stop the fire from spreading around our flanks. As the fire raged closer and closer to being out of control, Illarna stopped needing to catch her breath, yet she would not waste a single second longer than she needed, so she tried to take in her surroundings. Though hazy at first, a sudden strong wind gave her a momentary glimpse of most of the line, but all she could see was how fatigued and worried the peasants have become. Some had even begun falling to the ground, only to be lifted back up by their comrades. A feeling of pride mixed with the bitter flavour of grief washed over her, knowing all too well that a few might not last another hour. Reminded of her own duty by an extreme heat burning away her tears, Illarna found herself again uncertain and questioning, for she feared that she may have bitten off more than she could chew. Shaking her head, she struck the thought from her mind and got back to work, for she knew that the defence would most certainly fail if even a single soul held back. Hearing rushed footsteps, Illarna pulled herself back to what looked to be a maiden from Annika's charge. Annika has a plan to stop the fire from spreading north. It should decrease the area that needs to be protected, but more importantly, the plan should prevent the fire from flanking the defence line. I do hope she knows what she is doing, Illarna expressed with the clear exhaustion and worry carrying in her voice. With smoke billowing ever thicker and fires beginning to ignite all over the place, the fight to keep the fire at bay faltered upon a knife's edge. Even with over 200 people aiding the effort to fight, the line flickered and threatened to fail. However, by the will of every person present, they held the fire at bay, time and time again. Her own strength about to fail, Illarna pushed on, fueled by pure adrenaline. But the line had been fighting for a good hour, and so she made the only decision she could. "Maidens, it's time to fall back. Take all you can with you." Showing their unsurpassed training, the maidens followed their orders with a grace few knightly orders could match, and everyone began to withdraw. With the smoke clearing slightly, Illarna realised the winds were picking up again, but as she investigated, she quickly realised there had been no change in its direction. Suddenly the sound of drums sounded. Illarna smiled as she knew Annika had reached the northern front and had successfully held the fire back. Hearing a loud crack, Illarna barely had time to react before a spray of embers flew past, narrowly missing her. Quickly finding her feet, Illarna turned, focusing on the spot where the embers had landed. Counting no less than 5 separate fires beginning to burn, Illarna pulled up a bucket and doused the nearest, but as she turned to get another, she saw the bigger picture. The second line was already lost. Large sections on the eastern side of the road were already beginning to burn, some of which were already out of control. The true reality of the situation hit her like a sledgehammer. Seeing no other way, Illarna turned to the maiden behind her, ordering her to signal the retreat. Waiting for the maiden to fall to action, Illarna turned north and moved into a sprint, making sure no one would be left behind. Struggling to see more than 2 feet in front of herself, Illarna held tight to those trailing behind her, for a single slip could be the difference between life and death for the lot of them. Every step taken guided only by the wind at her back, and a hand outstretched as a warning probe for danger. Stopping for a moment as the hair on her body began to stand on end, Illarna looked around as she sensed something or someone watching her. Suddenly, a shadow in the fire began forming into a silhouette. The impossibly white heat in the fire highlighted its figure. Heart racing, she gripped harder to the hand behind her and moved as fast as she could, bursting from the smoke onto the main street of Rennum, her entire group falling to the ground, fatigued to the point of fainting. Looking back, Illarna counted their number, making sure none had been left behind. But as she came to the last, she realized that 2 of the villagers were missing. Hearing the familiar sound of footsteps approaching, Illarna stumbled to her feet and recognized Sylvain and a small clutch of maidens alongside her, a smile growing on her face as she stood firm and soldierly. "Sylvain, I need you to escort the injured and elderly out of the village via the north road. I don't think the fire here is going anywhere anytime soon," Illarna ordered sternly but clearly fatigued.
"I got this, La. You have been fighting this fire all day. Let me stay, and you go. Clearly you need to rest. Seriously, look at you. You can barely stand. You're breathing heavy and forcing out your words, and by the light look at all that soot and grime. You're in no condition to continue fighting. Seriously, I'm surprised you haven't collapsed already."
"Trust me when I say that I could sleep for a week, but I will be staying right here to oversee the defences. Take a group of maidens with you. You will need them to attend the injured and the sick, for I fear there will be many more before the day is seen to an end." Illarna paused a moment, looking hesitantly towards Sylvain. "Be careful. There is something unnatural about this fire. I don't know what it is that I saw, but I cannot shake the feeling that there is something very wrong here." Sylvain hesitated a moment before agreeing.
"Yes, my lady."
No sooner did they leave, the fire burst into action onto the street, spreading fire far and wide. Wasting no time, everybody moved to effect throwing water over the flames and smothering what they could. However, as soon as one fire was smothered, another 5 sprung up around it. Quickly growing out of control and intensifying, the fire expanded rapidly before suddenly exploding with an unbelievable force, knocking everything and everyone over for hundreds of meters. Giant fireballs rained down over the city in every direction, inadvertently cutting Illarna and a few of her maidens off from everyone else. Feeling the rocky ground pressing against her back, Illarna opened her eyes to a sky darkened by black smoke. Rolling to her side, she looked in horror at the destruction scattered before her. The unconscious forms of her maidens sprawled across the sand and stone shook her to action, but as soon as she moved, every muscle in her body lit up with pain. Gritting her teeth, she stood staggered, barely enduring the pain, yet she did endure, and before long she had stumbled to the closest maiden. Scouring through her pocket, Illarna looked for anything she could use to damp her face, but she found nothing. Looking around for a way to escape, Illarna quickly realized that she was surrounded by fire and could see that there was little chance that any of them were going to get out. Suddenly, the edges of the fire began to build up and churn, and a second explosion abruptly erupted, sending a pillar of fire into the sky. Falling back, the flames coalesced into a figure of molten flame. Unable to turn from the sight, Illarna looked to what she thought was its head, the flames flaring bright from the demon's eyes betraying its intent. Seconds later, the fire demon sprung forward, searing all traces of sweat away in an instant, lifting her arm up in an instinctive gesture to protect herself. Illarna watched in bewilderment as the entity smashed against a barrier of fire forming before her, the collision sending a hail of embers in all directions. The sustained force from the fire demon wailing against the barrier taxed its integrity to the point that Illarna could feel the fire beginning to sear her cheeks. Yet she had no idea what was happening, nor what was protecting her, but she did not dare move her arm, even though she could feel the energy draining each time the entity clashed with the barrier. Bashing and thrashing in a rage against her defiance, the fire demon roared. Feeling the last of her strength fleeing her body, Illarna's vision grew hazy, and suddenly she wondered if her end was fast approaching. Wishing only to see the sky one last time, Illarna looked to the heavens and noticed a strange clearing in the smoky sky. With what remained of her depleted self, she smiled and watched as a white eagle flew across the sky to the west. In that small moment of peace, all her other worries faded away, and she could not help but think how beautiful the creature looked as it soared. Suddenly she wondered whether she may be hallucinating, but then she thought that if this was the last thing she saw before her death, then she did not mind it at all, and at least she figured it was a little less morbid than fearing one's end. Faint and sounding a great distance away, Illarna heard the voice of a maiden trying to get her attention.
The wind, my lady, it's finally changed. It's forcing the fire back onto itself.
Trying to turn back to the demon, Illarna suddenly realized she was on the ground. Tilting her head, she looked to the creature of fire as it fell back into the flames, making a high-pitched wail as it dispersed. Its piercing shriek forced everyone to fall to a prone position, their hands raised to their ears in an effort to protect themselves from the harrowing sound, all except for Illarna, for her mind had already gone and all she could hear were the sound of bells as the last of her senses faded into the world of dreams.
Chapter 10. The winds roared as the great white held domain over the ancient trees of the Amberwoods, its veil allowing only the slightest of starlight through its mighty bulwark, now encroaching upon even the stalwart Tal'dar trees of old. Therin forced himself forward, battling for each and every step, all the while cursing himself for being so foolhardy as to return to this damned forest. But he knew it was a price he would probably pay again for the slightest chance at seeing another of those magnificent creatures. However, he was not yet too proud nor foolish to admit that the situation was proving ever more precarious, and if history was anything to go by, he knew well to hold no hope that the storm held any intention to abate. Rather, he knew his best bet for survival was to look for a spot to hunker down, and to at least outlast this storm, for he knew well that the temperature was now far more dangerous than any hunger. Strength all but spent, Therin finally spotted a particularly large Tal'dar tree, its thick trunk capable of providing at least a little protection from the harassing winds. Hope rekindled, he quickly moved to take refuge at its base, yet as he lowered to the ground he saw a strange shifting light gleaming in the distance. Mesmerized, he watched as it seemingly swayed about, moving closer and closer. Although soft at first, it quickly grew until all but the closest trees around him shone with that strange etheric light, its luminous completely alien, even compared to the warmth of the Tal'dar at his back. Fear taking root, Therin quietly dropped even lower, trying to hide his presence from the approaching entity in fear of its identity. Transfixed, Therin waited, as a lone figure stepped forth bound in a cloak of earthly shades, holding firm a tall wooden staff crowned with a beautiful azure stone, gleaming a brilliant gold from the reflected flames of a torch. The figure continued forth, only stopping once. He stood close enough for Therin to see the man's face, and it was an old one at that. Stranger yet, the old man gazed left to right, seemingly unfazed by the blizzard, and perhaps unaware of his presence. For a moment he held to the hope that by some miracle he had not been seen, yet he knew at heart it was a foolish thought. Almost jumping from his skin, Therin shifted as the old man looked directly down at him, all the while resting his weight on his staff. A prolonged moment passed, but eventually the old man began to speak in an unreasonably clear voice, considering how loud the blizzard was howling around them. "You need not fear me, friend of the woods." The old man took a moment to assess Therin's reaction. "Fear is often far more deadly than any apparent danger you might think that stands before you. At the very least, it is often more lethal. You showed great courage in helping the griffin, friend, so now I must ask you to do so again, as you will find no shelter down there in the snow." Therin looked to the old man, wanting to reply, but with his throat rasped from thirst and clenched by fear, he was unsure whether he would be able to hear him. Nevertheless, he tried to be as clear as possible. "What is an old man doing out in this blizzard?" The old man laughed rambunctiously. "Old, you say? I may be aged, but I am definitely not old, young man. Nevertheless, you may call me Tal'azar, but by all that is good, please don't call me old man." Tal'azar glanced sideways. "Old man. I should be offended indeed." Taken aback by Tal'azar's candor and confidence, Therin watched the man as he spoke, trying to get the measure of him. "My apologies. Tal'azar, what are you doing out here in the middle of this blizzard? You look barely able to stand." Tal'azar smiled humbly. "The cold doesn't faze me, though this snow definitely makes it slow getting around. But to your question, I guess you could say this is my home. Though I must admit, I am quite astonished, young cub. Why are you so frightened by a little wind and snow?" Finding his courage, Therin stood up and moved forward to get closer. "You call this a little snow? Are you blind as well as old? This is no mere snowfall, it's a full-blown blizzard, and a far worse one than I have ever seen." Tal'azar straightened, lifting his staff before dropping it again. A shockwave raced out in the blink of an eye, pushing the blizzard back, creating a bubble-like space around Therin and himself. See, that's some good senses there, cub, but it begs to question. Why are you here if you know this to be true? Distracted by the blizzard etching its way across the barrier, Therin realised what Tal'azar must be, though he could still hardly believe it, and who could blame him? Especially considering all the strange occurrences that had happened over the past few weeks. How could he have ever guessed that he would meet one of them? Even as he began to come to terms with the facts of his eyes, a note of shock permeated through his voice as the word escaped his lips. You're a Tal? Leaning back upon his staff, Tal'azar followed Therin's gaze to the barrier. Actually, to be more specific, I am a Tal'ar, but the distinction is minor and understandable that you would not know the difference. Tal'azar sighed, looking back to Therin. These lands are indeed archaic, but it matters not. I know a shelter that is near. I think it would be best if we wait out this blizzard there. A flicker in the barrier drew Therin's attention briefly back before the entire barrier began moving. Looking over to Tal'azar, who was already beginning to walk south, Therin quickly followed suit. Wait, you said that what I did was brave, but how could you know of it if you were not there? Therin fell behind a moment, coming to that realization. How long have you been watching me, and at the risk of being too frank, why? Hearing the strength in Therin's voice, Tal'azar stopped and turned to face him. I heard a disturbance carried upon the winds of the forest. It seemed a fair distance from here, about 4 nights past, and to be honest, the fact that I felt it at all suggests it was rather powerful. Tal'azar wavered a moment to think and brushed the snow from his long beard. Very powerful indeed, and old it would seem. Therin looked down, refusing to correlate the time frame with his own experience with the swords. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the timing was far from coincidental. You've been following me for the past 4 days, then? Tal'azar laughed. No, that's not what I said. What I felt only lasted for about an hour. After that, I felt nothing. I couldn't even tell from what direction it came from. 3 days later, I heard the griffin's call and came to see what all the fuss was about. Little did I realize I would find a strange young man showing more courage than brains. Truly, for a moment, I wasn't sure if the griffins were going to attack. Alas, it would seem rather evident that they sensed something worthy about you. It was then that I decided to follow you to find out what it might be. However, I must say that it is interesting that you reacted when I mentioned the incident 4 days ago. Tal'azar raised his staff, dispelling the barrier before pointing it to Therin. A split second passed, as the howling winds rushed back into the negative space created by the barrier, and immediately Tal'azar began to whirl his staff about, pulling the ice from the air. Before Therin knew what was happening, Tal'azar thrust the staff forward, releasing a wave of freezing air that washed over Therin, like a chilling wave that pulled him from the ground and held him suspended in the air. His emotions boiling over, Therin pushed and pulled at his bonds, trying to release himself. However, they held strong, and the wind continued rasping at his flesh. As he began to panic, a wave of calm washed over him, and his emotions switched with surprising ease when suddenly he fell limp, leaving his body to the whims of his bonds. Unable to see nor feel, a calming serenity soon developed, but like pressured glass it broke to a voice calling out to him. By the blood of old, by the line of your lineage, you must awaken, for the dragon's ascension is at hand, and the time of the Tal'dorin has come. The voice echoed to sound of bells beginning to ring, quietly at first, but ever increasing, until suddenly the voice boomed once again. Awaken! Waking to the taste of blood on his lips, Therin opened his eyes, but could only see a blur of white and brown. Rolling to his back, he looked up. Slowly his eyes adjusted, and to his surprise there was no longer a blizzard, but a light wind carrying a sprinkling of snow. Spitting the blood from his mouth, Therin slowly pulled himself up, but stopped as he noticed Tal'azar watching over him. What the hell was that all about? Tal'azar tilted his head. I was testing you, young cub, but I must admit that I did not foresee you having such a connection to the source, nor that you would react so severely to my interference with said connection. And to be honest, I didn't even know that you were a Tal before now. Tal'azar said, looking to the beautiful night sky. In all honesty, I feared you might be a servant of the shadow. Taking a moment to let the implication permeate his thought, he continued. Please understand there are so few of us left that I had to be certain. I thought you said that you were a Tal'ar, not a Tal, Therin commented, trying to distract his mind from the lingering anger. Tal'azar smiled proudly. Good, you catch on quick, though this attitude of yours may prove a problem for you in the future. Tal'azar paused briefly to ponder his words. You see, Tal is a more generic term people use to refer to anyone who can use the source, but there are nuances far deeper than that, to us at least. Therin regained his footing and brushed the snow from his clothes. What do you mean by nuanced? I still don't really understand any of this, and you speak as if I should. You will have to forgive me. I haven't had many visitors for quite some time. I may have forgotten the common pleasantries. Tal'azar replied with a hint of haste permeating his voice. Unsatisfied, Therin questioned further. You attacked without warning, and you blame isolation for your behavior?
You must understand I have my reasons. Come, I will tell you more. My home, it's not far, and I could really use me some tea.
Stopping for a moment, Tal'azar rested his staff in the snow and gazed out upon the forest, scanning it for some purpose only he knew. Following closely, Therin came up beside him, trying to see what he was looking for, but nothing stood out. Sensing Therin's frustration growing, Tal'azar turned to him and placed a hand on his shoulder.
Calm yourself, cub. The paths ahead are infinite, and the one I wish to traverse is fleeting.
Head on a swivel, Therin quickly took an inquisitive stance, a single question burning in his mind. What do you mean fleeting? Does the path move by some unknown means? Raising his hand from Therin's shoulder, Tal'azar turned back to the forest.
It is as I have said. Now calm yourself and listen to the wind.
Shaking the doubt from his mind, Therin slowed his breath, trying to do just as Tal'azar had said. But soon he realized the wind would not so easily reveal its secrets. Therin's eyes continued to sweep over the horizon, surveying all before him. Ears perked and primed, he listened, and waited for the slightest of sound, but with every passing moment his curiosity slowly changed into impatience. Suddenly something shifted in the distance. Where once there were trees and bush, now only stood a narrow, lightly used passage, veiled by a thicket of trees and a light blanket of snow. Pointing to the passage, Therin informed Tal'azar. Over there. Tal'azar smiled, clearly pleased by the news.
Good. It would seem she has given us her blessing. Come, we haven't far to go now.
Needing a moment to regain his strength, Tal'azar moved forward towards the passage with Therin following closely. After a few slight turns, the winding passage opened, revealing a small glade with an overgrown cabin, nestled comfortably beneath the imposing canopy of old oaks. At its center stood a lone Tal'dar, greater than any he had ever seen before. Its canopy stood sentinel over the entire glade, and its peak towering far above the oaks beside it. At its base, the familiar sound of running water could be heard trickling southward into a partially frozen lake. Finding Therin completely transfixed on the glade, Tal'azar felt a little guilty as he moved to interrupt his moment of bewilderment.
Come, the tea will not boil itself.
Therin jolted a little as Tal'azar spoke, however he hid it well with a question. You never told me what tea is, though. If it is boiled, I would assume it's some kind of drink.
You assume correctly, but it is more than just a heated drink.
Tal'azar smiled as they arrived at the cabin.
You will see.
With his staff resting against the intricately carved outline of an eagle in flight, Tal'azar applied light pressure upon the door, and to Therin's astonishment it swung open. Showing complete comfort, he walked inside, placed his large pointy hat on a hook beside the door, and leant his staff against the wall beside it. Following Tal'azar into the cabin, Therin looked across the room, but fell back completely humbled by the cabin's aesthetic. The tables, chairs, and furniture looked as if each was grown purposefully, its utility carved meticulously from its bulk. I have never seen wood fashion such as this.
It is of my design,
Tal'azar answered, searching through one of the cabinets attached to the wall. Finding what he sought, Tal'azar pulled out a large metal pitcher made from fine silver.
Could you be a good lad and fetch some water from the stream outside? When you return, I'll tell you of the dragons.
Shocked by the casual mention of dragons, Therin gestured in a slight bow. Are you sure the water is clean?
That's a smart question, though I don't really know for sure, although I do believe so. I drink from it regularly, and it hasn't harmed me yet.
Tal'azar laughed. Therin smiled in reply as the humour caught him by surprise. Noticing Tal'azar turning to look for something else, Therin picked the pitcher up and moved to fetch the water. Pushing the door open, Therin stepped outside, but a flash of fur suddenly drew his eye. Looking up, he saw a deer staring directly at him. He could not help but wonder if it could be the same stag as he had seen the previous day. With that realization setting in, Therin stepped forward slowly, yet it remained still. By chance are you following me? I sure hope not, for the last time we met you almost skewered me. Therin looked on, unsure as to how he should continue. Perhaps you dislike the arrow. I apologize about that, but you must understand even now the hunger still nags at me. Having mentioned his stomach, Therin felt the vice-like grip upon his suppressed feeling beginning to wane. Heeding its call, he nervously turned and moved to the stream. Kneeling, Therin placed the pitcher into the gently flowing water. As the pitcher filled, Therin heard the deer's soft steps coming closer. Looking up, he watched as the creature lowered its head and began to drink straight from the stream. Content, Therin found himself watching as the animal drank its fill, completely comfortable with his presence. The deer quickly finished and before long walked off, disappearing into the brush. With the pitcher now full of water, Therin followed suit, returning to the cabin. Upon pushing open the door, Tal'azar turned to Therin, a question burning upon his lips. "Young cub, who were you speaking to out there just now?" Therin stopped mid-step, as the week's events were becoming too much for his mind to sort out. There was a white deer in the glade with a crown of gold, and for some reason I swear that I saw it earlier, twice in fact, but it can't be the same one, could it? Because that would be insane. I mean, it's either that or I'm seeing things, though these days either option seems completely possible. Therin placed the pitcher on the bench and took a seat at the table exhausted, for the night's late hour had finally caught up with him. Detecting the clear exhaustion in Therin's voice, Tal'azar turned to face him with a bright red apple in hand. "Here, take this. It should return some colour to your face." Passing the fruit to Therin, he continued. "The Amberwoods is full of life, even though it is rarely seen. Now this deer you speak of, I would say you are perhaps correct, though a white deer would be quite rare." Tal'azar sat on that thought for a moment, allowing the description to settle in his mind. "I believe the creature may have been Arnaxis. He has walked these grounds for the longest time, and with luck he will walk them ever longer." "Well, I'm grateful my arrow missed its mark then. However, how is it possible for me to not recall the deer being white? I have been in its presence twice now, and I swear it was like any other. Yet I have a strong feeling that it is the same deer. I just do not understand how." Therin fell back, trying to wrap his head around this conundrum. "Arnaxis does not grace many with his presence, but when he does, it is of great importance, and take heart. I doubt any arrow could find him so easily." Tal'azar pondered the question, but the sound of boiling water drew him away. Using a ladle, Tal'azar poured the hot water through a cross mesh of fine wire, holding a mixture of roughly ground leaves. The water quickly spilled through and came out a deep amber colour as it fell into the cups upon the table. Sputtering from the bitter taste, Therin looked to Tal'azar, who was laughing. "Here, this will pull the flavours together." Tal'azar dropped 2 small grape-sized objects into the hot brew, its mass dissolving quickly. Hesitant at first, Therin took another mouthful of tea, but this time he found the flavours exceptional, without a hint of bitterness remaining. "You're right, this tea has no equal, though I must admit I do not have much experience in the finer things the world has to offer." Tal'azar pulled a platter of bread wrapped in a large leaf from the cupboard and placed it on the table. "You still have much time ahead of you, young cub. If I were to make a guess, I think your journey may have just begun." Therin again fell back into the chair with a roll of bread in hand. "If my life so far is anything to go by, it will be a journey cut tragically short." Therin looked to the door as it creaked. "All jokes aside though, I'm tired of fate testing me at every turn." "Therin, fate is but an empty word. To see beyond the simplicity of its meaning, you must understand that which pulls the strings beyond." Tal'azar paused for a moment. "The first thing you must understand is fate is not a single entity, but many, each vying for dominance over the others. By your will I could assist in determining which of the great entities hold sway over you." "You still worry that I may be a servant of the shadow?" Therin questioned, leaving a challenging note hanging in the air. Tal'azar held a moment, understanding well why Therin went on the defence. "No, I do not believe you to be a servant of the shadow. Quite the opposite, in fact. As I have said before, you may in fact be a Tal, though how this is the case I'm not so sure. But I do, however, intend to find out, with your help of course." "Apologies, Tal'azar, but I do not see your meaning. How can I ever be a Tal? I'm just a simple blacksmith with a tragic tale, not unlike many others." Therin questioned, his curiosity ever searching for answers. "I will elaborate. I did not say that you were a Tal, only that you may become one. You see, young Therin, there has not been a new Tal born in well over 1,000 years. Although that is not to say it's in any way abnormal per se, but this cycle is far too young for a new Tal to rise." "You still speak as if I should know any of this, but I do not. Seriously. Me a Tal. Many would laugh at the notion. One in particular comes to mind, actually." Therin replied with a slight wince as he tried to grasp Tal'azar's meaning. "Wait, if a new Tal hasn't risen for 1,000 years, how old are you?" "Truthfully, I can't remember. I am, however, counted amongst the oldest of our order, for I have lived through 4 cycles." Tal'azar clarified. "Take this stone. It will help me see your lineage upon the wind." "How do you mean, on the wind?" Therin questioning further. Tal'azar reached for his staff. "I shall show you. Now concentrate on the wind. I will guide you to the power inside. There you will find your answer." Therin looked at the stone, his reflection mirrored back at him. In that moment, his mind became adrift as time slowed, and raw energy burst into existence, as a divine energetic light rode the currents of air as they crossed the room. Before long, the flow of time began to return to its normal state, and the light dispersed in a flicker. Tal'azar, I saw it, the power in the wind slowly making its way across the room. "Very good, cub.
As I have said, I am of the Tal'ar, herald of the wind.
Tal'azar took a moment, as a piece of information that Therin spoke caught his attention.
The wind, you mentioned it being slow. What did you mean by this? Did you mean it was slower than you expected, or that it seemed to slow down?
Curious about his meaning, Therin clarified. I mean, that time slowed considerably, or maybe my perception of it increased. Which is more accurate, I'm not so sure, but I can say that this is not the first time it has happened.
No, that can't be.
Tal'azar said softly, thinking on the meaning of his words.
Although it is very interesting. Therin, can you focus on the stone again, just like you did before, only this time think on slowing time?
Tal'azar watched Therin intently as he raised his staff, intending to slam it into the ground. However, as his staff descended, the world around him suddenly slowed, before freezing completely. Unable to free himself from this state, Tal'azar found his mind pulling back against the realization to what this could mean. With the answer out of his reach, he suddenly felt the power fading, and his staff fell to the floor. Finding himself on the ground, Therin slowly stood up, apologizing. My apologies, it has never been so strong, nor has it held me so tightly. It used the entirety of my will just to pull myself back. Leaning down to retrieve his staff from the floor, Tal'azar softened his face in an effort to ease Therin's worry.
No need for apologies, young cub. Though I must say that does indicate that you are indeed a Tal. Well, to be more specific, you're a Tal'orn, an Archon of Time. A word of advice, though. You must keep this quiet, at least for now, for it has ramifications you will wish to avoid.
Unable to read Tal'azar's expression, Therin questioned further. So, you say I'm a Tal'orn. You look unusually shaken. Why is that? You are the one who told me that I was a Tal to begin with, and now that it has been confirmed, you don't believe it?
To be honest with you, Therin, if I had not seen it myself, I would not have believed it. It makes no sense, or rather, it should not be possible, for this is only the 5th cycle. You should not be here. Not for a long time anyway. No, there is something amiss here, and I must get to the bottom of it.
Unsure how to react, Therin shifted his focus to another question. What are these cycles you mentioned, Tal'azar? You have spoken of them a few times now, but I haven't a clue what they are. Tal'azar could only smile as he looked at the young man standing before him.
It will be hard to explain, but I'll try.
Chapter 11. Floating on her back in a sea of golden light, Illarna felt only calmness as the sun's radiant eminence bathed her skin in its absolute warmth. Entirely content, she could hardly remember a time when she had felt so good, for all the stresses of responsibility that had for so long been lumped upon her shoulders now only felt like a distant memory, fading away on the ocean's tides. No lectures from her father, no stress-filled training sessions, no duty nor honour. No, there was nothing but serene silence. Broken from the trance by the rough churning of waves, Illarna opened her eyes, turned over, and began the instinctual motions of treading water. Feeling an immutable resistance beneath her feet, she pushed them into what she hoped was sand or stone, and stood up. To her surprise, it appeared as though she had somehow reached the shores of some unknown land, but it was unlike anything she had seen before. Stretching as far as she could see stood giant ligneous plants, with tall, slender trunks that held but a few yet large, broad leaves at their peaks. Some grew long, sharp leaves that swelled with water, while others created bizarre fractal patterns as they reached outwards to the world around them, but all grew as large as the greatest pines from her homeland. Yet unlike the natural tones she had grown accustomed, the flora here shone with the brilliance of colours, she thought all but impossible save for upon the canvas used by painters, and around their bases grew several varieties of bizarrely shaped plants completely unlike anything she could imagine. Some found their leaves dominated by bright reds and oranges, while others favoured the calming sheen of majestic blues and dramatic violets. Completely bewildered, Illarna could hardly hold back her excitement, but as she searched for all the novel colours and varieties, she abruptly realised that there were no people nor any signs of human habitation. However, she refused to give up the hope of discovery, so she searched on, and to her surprise in the distance, she saw a striking silhouette of a creature. Given its apparent distance, she figured must be inconceivably large. Transfixed, yet feeling no fear, she watched as the great beast glided about on magnificent wings so large they filled the sky as it soared across the heavens. Distracted as she was, Illarna almost missed the blue flame coalescing before her. Awe-stricken by both sights equally, Illarna tried her best to watch as the flame shifted to and fro before finally forming a face. Instantly recognizing it from her dreams, Illarna found herself speaking before she could curtail her curiosity.
You have been coming to my dreams for weeks, yet you have not said a word. Why? Indecipherable as the flames forming its face, the entity seemed to hold no reply as it stared back, seemingly unbound by her words, yet before long its mouth began to shift.
There is much you still have yet to learn, young one.
I do not understand your meaning, Illarna replied. I know that I am young, but I have already learned so much. I have been fed so much information in my lifetime that I would be surprised if there was any room for anything more.
I misspoke. The knowledge I speak of is already within you. It is but waiting for you to reach out.
Illarna stood confused, trying to wrap her head around the meaning, yet she could find no answer, so she echoed her assertion. The knowledge is within me? Again, I do not understand what it is you are insinuating. Besides, who are you to know these things about me?
I am Tal'azar, the dragon of the sun, and you, Illarna, are my herald. Though if it is easier, you may instead see me as a guide, a mentor if you will.
With a blank look on her face, Illarna could not find the words to describe the frustration she was feeling, for if anything she was now more confused than before. Noticing this, Tal'azar took the initiative to continue.
Worry not, young phoenix. I have been with you since the day of your birth. I have always been here with you through all your trials and tribulations. I was there with you through every choice, influencing your outcomes, so that you might be ready for the last of our days.
Falling silent for a time, Illarna wondered if the flames seemed to burn brighter. Silence soon growing all but defining, she wondered if the dragon was waiting for her to say something. But just as she tried, Tal'azar suddenly continued to speak.
Although I must admit that even I have found some of your choices questionable. Nevertheless, I still wonder if you might have changed as a result.
Seeming to trail off in thought, Tal'azar quickly continued.
It matters not. Fate cannot be changed. Only the parts played may yet shift in the telling. I surmise it cannot be helped, because in the end only you alone may make the final decision. I am but a humble benefactor, who may but lay out the choices before you, and hope that the path you choose is one we may both walk together.
Infuriated, Illarna burned with anger. So, you have been trying to manipulate me all along, invading my mind with your... Illarna paused, trying to think of the appropriate word. Tal tricks.
You can say what you will, but you don't know the alternative. So whether you agree or disagree, it matters not. I do what must be done. The time of the Tal'dorin is upon you, and I will do what I can to help you move forward to fulfill your fated purpose.
Oh, by the Tal, you are no different than everyone else. My entire life I've been lectured on my destiny. I already know what I need to do. I've been training much of my life for this day, and for your information I will choose my own fate.
Then choose, but know that it has already been preordained, whether it is by your hand or another. There is more to you than you think, yet you must unlock the knowledge within, if you ever wish to know why that choice matters.
Seeing only red, Illarna fumed. Everybody keeps telling me what to do. Illarna, you must do this. Illarna, you must do that. Whatever happened to what I want to do? Whatever happened to free will?
Free will, as you understand it, is an illusion. Everyone is bound to the cycle, even I.
Illarna forced herself to calm and gave a sideways glance at the luminescent blue flame, shifting orange. You seem to have an answer to everything, don't you?
I have existed in one form or another since before the formation of this rock, but if you mean to ask me why I'm here, then my answer is that we are paternally connected, so I am able to manifest in your dreams in this form.
Is this not your true form? And wait, what do you mean paternally? Illarna asked, almost missing its last words. A faint smile shifted across Tal'azar's face, along with a change of subject.
Ask your questions, little phoenix. Our time is far from endless.
Sorting through the many questions floating around in her head, Illarna plucked the most pertinent from her mind. The fire in Rennum, I should have died, correct?
Yes, for without my intervention your death was and still is inevitable, just as it is for all mortals.
Illarna was taken aback by the forwardness of Tal'azar's answer. Wow, I don't know what kind of answer I was expecting, but that was pretty morbid.
I simply gave you the answer to your question.
Yes, that may be so, but could you make your answers a little less grim? Besides, you spoke as if I'm still going to die. Care to elaborate? Acknowledging, Tal'azar added an important piece of information.
Separated from the source, all mortals die eventually, as I said before. It is what makes you mortal. Do you not recall tapping into the source? Apologies. I believe you called it the Tal previously.
Trailing from the sentence, Tal'azar continued.
Though it is a less accurate in meaning, I do see the misunderstanding, however. The word has changed many times over the eons.
feeling a sudden tiredness as she listened. Illarna tilted her head back, trying to recall her memories of fire. I remember being split from the others. I can also remember there was something in the fire that tried to kill me. Then, by instinct alone, I raised my arm to defend myself, but it was no good. That thing was too strong. Also, I'm not sure why this is, but the strongest memory I have is of a pure white eagle gliding across the sky. Illarna told Tal'ansol, recalling the memories. To your first question, for a split second you tapped into a particularly deep part of your soul, where the knowledge I spoke of is held slumbering until you are ready to use it. More specifically, in this case, you created a barrier, though the reality of it is quite the opposite, but the definition does not matter, as the result was the same. You used what information you could find in such a way that protected you and your maidens from the Erefix. Tal'ansol said, allowing her a moment to consider. Young Phoenix, the ability resides within you, though you may not remember how you did it. But please heed my warning, you are but one of many, all of whom are varyingly gifted with the ability to access the source. But it has a cost. Like with your own experience, your energy will swiftly fail you, a problem, sure, but vastly exacerbated by your lack of knowledge. Yet you must endure, for wielding the Tal is no small feat, and if you don't control your impulses, the source will prove your undoing. Considering its words, Illarna held only one more question. And the eagle? Judgment. Judgment? Why does every message have to be in riddles or omens? Why is everything so hard? You sound just like Sylvain. It would have been easier if I just died in the fire. Illarna exasperated in an overly dramatic tone. Easier for whom exactly? I would not let such trivialities stop you from walking the path I destined. As I mentioned earlier, I, Tal'ansol, the most loyal and fierce of the dragons, declare you my herald. A Tal of the Golden Sun, a Tal'en. Hairs on end, Illarna felt like her heart had stopped at that precise moment. Yet there was something else. An unexpected sense of relief had suddenly lifted from her shoulders. And then it dawned on her, a crucial piece of information had been withheld from her for such a long time. Deep down, she had known it all along, but she was not the last of her family. Or the least, no, she was different. Something more. Suddenly she remembered back to all the times she had felt a presence on her shoulder. A guardian she had always craved, yet could never find in her father. By the way, I thought you said everything was already predestined. But if that were the case, then why would you need to interfere? To change? Why would you even bother? Illarna responded, unable to hide away the smug look that appeared on her face. She finally thought she had found a contradiction in its words. Tal'ansol simply ignored the remark, moving on with the conversation instead. Now, Sylvain, there is a very wise woman. You should listen to her counsel more than you do. Now a word about the Silwind. She is a pure being who comes in many forms, yet always in white, and only when the very fabrics of fate are being woven. Perhaps she was watching you, deciding your place in her tapestry. But for you, I would remember that many have come to see her as symbols of nobility, courage and freedom, but most of all, change. Illarna started to sniffle, eyes watering as a flashback of her mother flooded her mind. My mother always used to tell me that I had a destiny, that my life would hold the fate of the world in my hands, that things aren't always as they seem, and that I should always trust within. Your mother was indeed a rare being, respected by many who crossed her path. Heart shaking, Illarna wiped away the tears running down her face. That thing you called a Erefix, why did it mean me harm? It was conjured by beings using the source, though their connection is different than yours. To achieve such a task, a group would be required, its size depending on their skills. So, you're telling me that this was a deliberate attack by men who wish me harm? Illarna reverted into a defensive gesture. Who? Those who conjured this Erefix are known to you. Eyes widening, Illarna needed no more information. Anatole, that slithering snake. I should have killed him when I had the chance. That prick will pay. He has been the bane of my existence since the day I was born. Hell, probably even before then. A thought came to Illarna's mind. Speaking of the Brotherhood, just out of curiosity, how are they able to use the source when everything they seem to do turns out bad? Father thinks I don't see it, but I am not so naive that I can't see what goes on in my own home. I have always been told that the source is good, and clearly they are not, so I am unsure how this works for them. They are not of the Tal, although strong, their power is drawn elsewhere. Stolen. Illarna felt a slight pull as her beautiful surroundings started to fade, the feeling of serenity lifting before her eyes, just as the feelings of chaos and burden started resurfacing. I have one last question to ask. This face you bear, he keeps reappearing in my dreams, and I cannot really remember him the moment I wake, no matter how hard I try. Who is he, and what does he have to do with me?
He is but one face of a grander meaning of a larger concept, his worldly form that of a man of great stature and character. He blends well into a society not of his own, yet still he denies who he is. But do not underestimate his abilities, for the world will bend at his passing. He will be your king and your savior. He will be the one who breaks the cycle in which we are all bound. He is strong-willed, and by choice alone will he strive to heights unseen. He is of the purest heart and stringent kindness, and will risk all, including his life, for the people whom he deems worthy of his trust. This and more lies ahead for you if you choose to align yourself. However, if you choose to not, the opposite effect may come to pass and all may cease to exist. However, I must warn you, there are far more players at this table than simply good and evil, of darkness and light, of Niklos and I. No, fate is not in the hands of a single entity, but many, each vying for a chance at total control.
Chapter 12. Stirring to the subtle sounds of flowing water, Therin found himself listening to the calming rhythms of nature. A young northern hawk's call rang, echoing across the glade, as a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. An orchestra of crickets began to chime, while the distant howls of dire wolves soon filled the air with their gathering opus. Pulling a hand to his face, Therin wiped the sleep from his eyes and awkwardly struggled as he pulled himself from the wooden bench. Instantly his back and neck lit up from the strain, and he yelped out in pain. Drawing the stubborn aches and pains from his mind, Therin staggered to his feet, his muscles still trying to catch up with his mind. Thanks due in no small part to his youth, the pain soon fell away, and the light coming from the door quickly drew the greater portion of his attention. Still half asleep, he began to notice that he could barely feel the cold, a rather unusual realization considering he was, at least as of last night, in the middle of a blizzard. Intrigued, Therin plucked a roll of bread from the table and moved toward the door to see firsthand. Struck by the sight, Therin felt a pleasantly temperate breeze wash over him as his eyes feasted on the little pocket of paradise bustling with life, a clear and present far cry from the weather he had been experiencing for the past 9 years. Startled by a voice from the other side of the house, Therin hastily dropped down to collect his shoes. Pulling tight the last buckle, he quickly moved around the side of the cabin, but again he found himself confronted by what he saw. Frozen, he watched as Tal'azar pulled a still rabbit from a wooden pail and placed it in the enormous beak of a black bird with golden highlights on its crown and wings. The giant beast's head pulled back as it reached far above the small house it stood beside. In a single gulp, the rabbit carcass was gone, and the creature had already begun to slump back down, looking for another. Finding himself stunned just like he had been so many times over the past days, Therin asked the only question that popped into his head. What on Aldertheia is that? In unison, both Tal'azar and the creature looked to Therin amused. He's an Aethan, but I just call him Tharn. Therin continued to watch in delight as the Aethan reached back down, taking another rabbit from Tal'azar's hand. Tharn seems a little on the chin, don't you think? Tal'azar smiled as he spoke. I don't know about that, but he seems to like it. Supporting the assertion, Tharn looked directly at Therin with what he could only assume to be a grin on his face. Taking the last rabbit from the bucket, Tal'azar pulled himself back and tossed the carcass far up into the air. With a swift and deadly grace, the great bird plucked it from the air with the very faintest of efforts. Satisfied, the Aethan took off and began to frolic in the air, in a manner that defied its size. Thankful to be watching from a distance, Therin could not recollect any words nor meaning that would help describe the spectacle unfolding in front of him. Taking the rare moment for what it was, Therin quickly realized it was a feeling he was beginning to feel far too familiar with. Attempting to pull Therin from his silence, Tal'azar moved beside him. I know how you must be feeling. A pair of griffins and an Aethan in as little as 2 days. It's a lot to take in. They are but the first of many wonders you will find in this realm, for our world is filled with many such marvelous creatures. And now that you're a Tal'dorn, you have all the time in the world to find them. Therin held quiet a moment as Tharn swooped back down to the ground, seemingly deciding he would rather listen in on their conversation. No, it's not that. It's him. He's terrified, though he hides it well. That is, pausing for a moment, Tal'azar chose his words carefully. Observant of you. You are correct. However, he's not alone in that regard. This morning we spotted a number of patrols by the edge of the forest, and he fears what that may mean, as do I. Initially proud of his accurate gauging of the Aethan's body language, Therin's attention shifted as he wondered if Tal'azar must have been referring to the men he had met earlier. The Dragon Guard are still here, but that's a good thing, correct? They were nothing less than helpful the last time I met them. Falling silent, Therin took pause, realizing he might have misunderstood what Tal'azar had said. Wait a second, why would you two be scared of them? I do not refer to the Drakas Vordar, but something far more disconcerting. The creature of which I speak are not from the realms of man, and as such should not be here, Tal'azar clarified. So, who are they to have you scared of their very presence? It's not really them that scares me, though they are capable of great suffering. It is what their presence may mean. I have my own theories, but it should have been impossible. This cycle should still have another 800 years before anything like this should be even remotely possible. Remembering that Tal'azar had mentioned the cycle last night, Therin decided to question for further clarification. This cycle, you mentioned it last night, but I fear I fell asleep before you could explain it to me. Tal'azar turned around and began walking. Come, I have many things that need to be done before I leave. I'll explain it as we go. Therin quickly fell in behind him, and Tal'azar continued. Though some may believe otherwise, we don't actually have all the answers. For example, even we of the Tal don't really know how it all began, save for what is written in our oldest text. Although as to how accurate they are, maybe someday you can tell me. Curious, Therin questioned further as Tal'azar leaned down to fill the bucket with water from the stream. How? What began? Calm yourself, young cub. I'm getting to it. It is said that in the beginning, before time or matter, there was only Anu, and it held a singular idea, order. However, in the silent nothingness of the first infinite moment of our universe, a second idea flashed into existence, and the idea of change was born. Intrigued by the notion, Anu split itself into two separate entities. Anu kept within itself the idea of order, but gave the aspect of change to its twin. By its very nature, the entity of change searched for an identity. Thereon, Rin was born, and from him came time. Seeing opportunity, Rin convinced Anu to assist him in creating something new. Curious, Anu agreed, and in time they began to mix, and thus the void was now ready. For with the presence of both time and order, creation was born, and the material nature of the universe exploded into existence. Anu's order spread in every direction, becoming the body and mass of the universe, making up the very fabric of the world and all others, things like the dirt beneath your feet, the food you eat, the water you drink, and even the air you breathe. Rin, on the other hand, remained largely the same, save for one thing. For with the presence of time it now gave matter meaning, the endless march of a universe ever driving forward to a new day. For many millennia now lost to us, the universe saw a great expansion of ideas and creation. However, a darkness grew hidden from the light of the stars as some had begun to question the very nature of their existence, and soon began to burn with baleful fires of hatred and revenge, angered by Rin's supposed betrayal of their father. But there was no consensus for among these newly formed godlike entities. 42 disagreed with their kin, and so went to Rin for help. Swayed by their plight, Rin agreed to help by sharing his power. However, he was betrayed, for amongst the 42 was the agent that first had the thought of revenge that started it all. He was a most cunning fiend, and he had a plan. Unable to live with the betrayal, 8 stood against the rest. The resulting battle lasted uncounted millennia and spanned all the knowable reaches of existence. But after an innumerable age of destruction, the 8 realized it was already far too late, so they fled, vowing to return one day to free him. Of those that reigned victorious, one rose above all others, for it was he that devised the plan that sealed away Rin and stole his power. None know his name, but all knew his touch, for in death all would see his effort. For death, as he became to be known, held the universe in his infinite cycle. That is until the 8 came up with a plan. In secret they made a pact and formed the 9 dragons. The first of them would of course be Rin. Although vastly diminished and all but absent, he was the eldest and most powerful. Humbled and honoured by their loyalty, he would no longer call himself Rin. Rather, he would adopt their namesake and become the Tal'dorin, the Dragon of Time. Tal'azar stopped as he poured the last of the water from the bucket over a small tree. Though taking in every word, Therin still didn't really know what he was talking about, so moved in to clarify, but instead found a smile growing on his face as he realized something. You called me a Tal'orn yesterday. Does that mean I'm somehow related to the Tal'dorin? Because that would be insane. By the light, I think everyone has heard of him. Laughing unexpectedly, Tal'azar swiftly replied, No. But a hesitation soon fell over his disposition. Although it is possible, the chance is far too small, so no, it is far too soon for any of that talk. Besides, that's not really how it works. The gods are more akin to our patrons rather than our progenitors, though I guess for the heralds it is different. They are most definitely part divine, for no human could wield that much power and survive. Remaining silent, Therin tried to absorb as much information as possible, yet Tal'azar probed again. Wait, haven't you had the dreams yet? Tal'azar questioned, seeing the confusion on Therin's face.
All of us go through a rather dramatic awakening in our first years.
Tal'azar pondered, laying out the question. Shaking his head, Therin answered swiftly. No. I have only had one dream, and it was quite possibly the most disturbing thing I have experienced in all my years. And now that I think on it, I may have seen this shadow character you mentioned. He was a deep abyssal creature, but a shadow nonetheless. Although it must be said, it seems to me that it was more than capable of following through with his threats.
So, Niklos came to you. That is interesting, and most definitely worrying.
Letting out a sigh, Tal'azar let himself a moment as he pondered.
The dragons must have a reason for remaining silent. But unless you turn out to be a herald in your own right, or maybe even this Tal'dorin of legend, we will never know, and we would be walking a fool's path to try.
Brow raised, Tal'azar pondered the meaning.
Well, what am I if not a fool? Perhaps it's some sort of stratagem, though if so, it seems foolhardy, for the shadow has already found you. No, that can't be the reason, so why, I wonder?
Pulling the pointed hat from his head, Tal'azar began to scratch his temple.
If you are indeed a Tal'orn, then perhaps it is different for you and your house. But how could we know, for there are no records of a Tal'orn in our tomes? By the light, why wouldn't the other dragons make contact? Or perhaps they can't, or won't.
Suddenly Tal'azar stopped as a realization dawned on him.
No, he can't be. It's only the 5th cycle, unless...
Tal'azar froze, slowly turning back to Therin, whom had begun to grow worried.
My apologies, I do not mean to alarm you, Therin. It's just that this whole situation is highly irregular. Please tell me exactly what the shadow said.
Taking a quick moment, Therin thought on that night. I can't remember his words exactly, but I do remember him claiming that I'm not my father's son, which is clearly ridiculous. He also questioned whether I might be the Tal'dorin, but then quickly rejected the notion, although it pains me to admit, his words felt like a blade that injured what little pride I had left. For even though I too thought it ridiculous, seeing the monster reject the notion so swiftly, and without thought hurt more than it should.
Is that all?
Thrown by the sudden yet firm voice, Therin forced down his unease and continued. Almost, yet there is one more thing. At the end of the encounter, the shadow became suddenly infuriated, almost hysterical actually. Suffice to say the shadow formed a scythe from its own form and flew into a rage. But instead of me being skewered like you would expect, the blade collided with a barrier of light that formed in front of me. Then before he could attack again, a blinding light flashed all around me, and I awoke. What that means I have no idea. Oh, and there was bells, really loud bells. Letting his words hang in the air, Therin attempted to gauge Tal'azar's reaction, but found only silence in the air. Any ideas?
I'm not sure. Your recounting of the event just raised more questions. Though I must say that I'm curious why the shadow would mention your father. Do you mind telling me his name?
My father's name is Illarna Ald'rune. Also, I learned recently that he served as captain of the Dragon Guard back in the day.
Really? That is indeed interesting, and the name sounds familiar somehow.
Tal'azar stopped a moment, trying to remember.
Your mother, is her name Isabella, by any chance?
Getting defensive, Therin hesitated in reply. Yes, Isabella is my mother.
I feared as much. I do remember the name, though it is not the name I knew him by. To me he was Tal'anor, and to the greater Tal he was the herald of Talvexos, the dragon of the northern winds. It's strange now that I think of it, but it was in fact his disappearance that drew me here in the first place, and it was the continued mystery that surrounded his absence that kept me here. But now it is more important than ever that I must return to the council and relay to them all I have learned. Therin, you should come with me. There's a lot you need to learn about yourself and your newfound abilities, and truly I cannot think of a better place for that to be done than with the Tal.
Tal'azar finished, forcing a smile in hopes of swaying Therin's misgivings, but more importantly decision.
I imagine Tal'anor would want it so.
Therin didn't have to think on his answer for long, but he held quiet a moment longer to make it seem like he was truly considering the idea. I'm sorry, Tal'azar, but I have family in Roland's Gap I can't leave behind. Watching carefully for Tal'azar's reaction, Therin then changed the subject. Tal'azar, about my father. Therin paused a moment, finding himself frozen by the very summoning of his father's memory. I was there when he disappeared. We were in this very forest 9 years ago hunting when something attacked us. Something that looked like ice but moved like a man. My father told me to run while he held them off. Feeling the pain anew, Therin did all he could to hold back the tears. That was the last time I saw him. Tal'azar stepped a tad bit closer as he placed his hand on Therin's shoulder.
9 years, you say? That is bad. If they have been here for that long, I wonder why I have only just begun to see them now, unless...
Tal'azar turned, returning to the house, speaking as he moved. Go to your family, Therin. I fear the king's forces are ill-equipped for what is to come." Wiping the lone tear from his cheek, Therin followed closely, his heart pounding in his chest. "Why? What is going to happen, Tal'azar?" Tal'azar stopped again as he stepped inside the door. "If the Ildarie have been here for 9 years, as you say, they will be far more prepared than I thought, and as such, they could be here in far larger numbers than I could have ever imagined." "Wait, are these Ildarie the ice men that killed my father?" Therin inquired with anger in his eyes. "Yes, but I doubt they could kill a herald so easily, especially when he would be far more useful alive. Now that I think about it, if they found a way to use his power, it's possible they could have passed an entire army through the fissure." Tal'azar turned again, speaking to himself. "That would mean the cycles must be ending and the convergence is upon us, but that's impossible. There should still be hundreds of years left before that. Wait, no, it can't be. Yet all the signs are aligning, so they must mean something." Shaking the thought from his head, Tal'azar refocused on the young man in front of him. "I'm sorry, Therin, but I must take my leave and report what I have seen to the council, for I fear time is running out, and much sooner than any of us could have predicted." Therin chased after Tal'azar as he pushed his way through the house. "Wait, what about my father? If he is still alive, we must save him." Tal'azar froze and turned to face Therin. "No, you must go to Roland's Gap to save your family. But Therin, while you are there, please warn the prince that I was wrong. Tell him that I fear an army in the hundreds of thousands could soon march from the Amberwoods. Tell him that he must evacuate Roland's Gap and retreat south. Make them chase him to the capital, for I fear it's the only place that can hold the Ildarie back long enough for the king to muster his armies." Tal'azar stopped again, making sure he held Therin's full attention. "Therin, please heed my words well, for the dragons have placed you here with me in this moment. And while you may not be the Tal'dorin, I see a greatness in you I have found to be rarer than all other. So please join the prince and head south, and once you reach the capital, make your case to the king. It is vital he realizes the magnitude of the invasion before him. Once I have done what I must, I'll meet you at the Golden Bow beneath the laurelette arch. Therin, before I go, I promise that as soon as we push the Ildarie from Ald'ruvar, we will return to search for your father. And one last thing, Therin, always trust in yourself, but question others. Your instincts will be invaluable in the times ahead. And please, young cub, save as many as you can, for the Ildarie are ruthless." Therin nodded and replied before his emotions could break his poise. "What about the shadow? What should I do if it returns?" A slight fatigued smile appeared on Tal'azar's face as he replied. "The same as the rest of us. Resist." Turning, he pulled a bag from the side of the table and returned outside. Sensing the commotion, Tharn swooped back down, landing only meters from the house. Therin stood beside Tal'azar and raised his hand to pat the bird, and to the old Tal's surprise, Tharn let him. "Thank you, Tal'azar. You are a good man." Tal'azar relaxed a little at the compliment. "You honor me, Therin, and fear not, we will meet again." "You were right, you are definitely not as old as I thought." Tal'azar laughed. "Thank you, I, however, cannot take all the credit. Tharn here kept at least my mind as young as I could ever wish." "Is that so? Just how old are you?" "To be honest, I stopped counting after my second millennium." Climbing to Tharn's back, Tal'azar pointed to a path on the southern side of the grove. "Follow that path, it will lead you from the forest, but go with haste, for I fear time is no longer on our side, even for you, young Tal'orn." Tal'azar smiled, watching the grin subtly moving across the young man's face. Feeling a gentle movement of Tal'azar's feet, Tharn jumped into the air, and with the beating of his mighty wings he jolted forward, sending arcing bolts of lightning flashing southward into the trees. Impressed, Therin watched in wonder as the mighty Aetharn thundered away, leaving only the telltale flashes of lightning and the sound of thunder to mark his passage. Therin waited a moment to collect his thoughts, but held Tal'azar's warning to heart. Gathering food and water, he headed south along the path, his mind ever racing at the thought that just maybe he could be the Tal'dorin of legend. And in that moment, a flicker of hope was rekindled, for if he were, just maybe he could return and save those that he loved.